Welcome everyone to the Manhwa Mentor channel. Today we will plunge into the fascinating world of manga, where every choice of the hero Sujao can change his fate and the fate of those around him. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you like what you see. Let's begin our journey with a mysterious and dangerous world, where every turn of the plot promises incredible discoveries and dramatic challenges. Recently, local residents have begun to disappear in the city, as the unknown person says at the beginning of our story. It turned out that this alarming information came via radio. Police urged citizens not to leave their homes alone at night. At that time, the hero was puzzled by his location and began to look around, while the radio continued to warn about possible dangers when traveling by taxi. Frightening yellow eyes suddenly loomed out of the darkness. It turned out that it was just an angry cat slowly approaching the gathered people. The guy sitting next to the main character was scared, not expecting to see an animal here. From behind, someone sharply extended their hands towards the cat, trying to catch it. This unknown person coped with the task, and the cat was caught. The guy, worried for his safety, realized that something strange was happening and wondered why he was here. It turned out that he became part of the terrifying system of the Hotel of Horrors, where an ominous maniac announced his hunt on a rainy night. With surprise and horror, the guy realized that he was actually in this horror hotel. A maniac killed an innocent cat in the dark, and the associated people continued to fear his intentions. Suddenly, an unknown person rushed at his victim with a knife, and instead of a head, he had a bare skull and one eye glowed red. All this happened 5 hours before the current moment, when the two people in the panic room did not consider it scary and boring. At that time, it was no longer possible to scare people with such effects, and they wasted their money, intending to leave a bad review of the room. It turns out that the main character's name is Sujao, and his work partner asks why he looks so gloomy, as if he didn't get enough sleep. The colleague could not understand why such a talented guy wastes time on such tasks, but the hero explains that this is his homework from the police academy. The hero did everything possible to earn money and was here not of his own free will. The man sincerely believed in the talents of his younger friend and was confident that a great future awaited him. Sujao began to complain about the excessive amount of homework and analytical tasks at the police academy, noting that it literally gave him a headache, and here he could let off steam by scaring the guests with just one shot. His partner understood that working part-time was a personal matter, but warned that if it affected his academic success, it probably wasn't worth it. In fact, the case he was investigating had nothing to do with homework, and his part-time job was not related to paying for school. The business he is involved in is connected with his childhood. In this damned business, the hero lost what was extremely dear to him. After all, it was then that he lost the most important person in his life. Many years later, the police still have not identified the killer, and although the story was initially widely discussed, very few people remember it now. But Sujao did not forget. The loss of the most significant person in his life gave rise to an unprecedented desire for revenge, and that is why the guy entered the police academy with one goal: to find the killer. No matter what price is paid, he must punish this criminal, and he is ready to do it with his own hands. The events unfolded on a rainy evening as night slowly fell. The main character began preparing to return home, dressing neatly. He took with him a knife, which he had previously used as a prop in the panic room. Going outside, the hero decided to call a taxi to avoid wet weather and quickly get home. The taxi driver at that moment was complaining about the terrible weather, expressing impatience about the end of the rain. But the guy immediately realized that in such weather, it was more profitable for him, since more passengers were ready to get into a warm taxi. At this moment, the taxi driver spoke about a recently appeared maniac who impersonates a taxi driver, picks up passengers, and then decides their fate. And this man was searched for a long time, but was never caught. and he was not sure what the police were doing. But now, people don't want getting into a taxi out of fear. At some point, the topic of conversation changed, and the taxi driver decided to find out more about the hero's life and asking what he was doing. The guy replied that he was a student at the police academy. Suzhou agreed with the taxi driver, sharing his opinion that the police were doing little to find this psychopath. Suddenly, the taxi driver seemed to see something terrible in front of him and trembled with fear. A silhouette of a man dressed in a raincoat appeared in front of the car, standing right in front of the car. The taxi driver began to press the brake with a sharp movement of his foot to avoid hitting a person. Due to a sharp turn of the steering wheel, the car began to slowly roll over. At great speed, she flew out and began to fall into a huge hole, turning over in the air. Finally, they landed, and Suzhou found himself in a semi-conscious state. At that moment, the silhouette of a man in a raincoat appeared in front of him. He had a knife in his hands, and his intentions were clearly hostile. Then, the hero remembered that this is exactly how the maniac brought him to this horror hotel. Realizing this, the smart guy realized that the killer had been found. All the years he had been preparing, imagining in his head what to do in this situation, but such a turn of events was unpredictable. Suddenly, the maniac spoke, saying that there could only be one hunter in this room, and he was done with that cat. As if gone mad, the maniac began to emerge from the shadows, apologizing for the wait, with a knife in his hands, ready to do terrible things. Out of fear, the man sitting opposite peed himself, afraid of the upcoming events. At this moment, the maniac became interested in the fact. After all, he brought many people here. But Suzhou was the first who was not afraid of him and looked at him boldly, which was unusual for a maniac, and the hero was surprised that he considered himself a predator. It was true, before him all people were victims, and he enjoyed taking life. A real hunter tracks down his prey himself, but this scoundrel simply took advantage of the situation by dragging them here when they were unconscious. And if it weren't for the professional skills of this gentleman, he would not have stood in front of them so contentedly. The maniac didn't like these words, and he wanted to understand what this guy sitting in front of him wanted. Without hesitation, the hero repeated that the maniac personally could not have brought them here, and he is not a hunter, much less a predator, so the scoundrel is wrong. Therefore, Suzhou proposed to catch them again, which greatly interested the maniac, and he wanted to check whether he was really being challenged. The smart hero asked if this room was the house of a maniac, suggesting that they were now on the first floor, and therefore they first needed to be released, and then try to capture them before dawn. And if he succeeded, then the villain would be able to complete his job. Intrigued by the madness, the man promised that if he did not catch them before dawn, he would allow them to return home alive. At that very moment, the game began. The maniac easily freed his victims, and they slowly moved away. Licking his blade, the madman asked if it was true that they were thinking of escaping, because he would not allow them to leave this place, and even if time passed, he would still find them and kill them. A man running from a crime scene turned to a student at the police academy, doubting whether the maniac would be able to find them, and it was enough to just survive this night to return home. The hero realized that there was no point in being naive, and the maniac would not let them go, even if they hid. There were bars on all the windows, and the place seemed to be outside the city. The criminal made it clear that he brought many victims here. To stay alive, they needed to act urgently. The taxi driver introduced himself. His name is Zhao. Come on, and he was interested to know who this guy was helping him now. At this moment, the hero decided to stop. Then he revealed that he had not completed his studies in criminal investigation, but also studied law and medicine, and he often visited the anatomical theater and temporarily worked in the panic room, and his name was Suzhou. Moving gradually, they explored the area to see where they could hide. It turned out that one of the rooms was flooded. All the passages in the rooms led exactly to the one they had just approached. It seemed to them that someone had been here recently, and their things might have been behind this door. Having opened the door slightly, the hero decided to explore the room to understand what to do next. But as soon as the door swung open, a terrible smell of rot came from it, and what they saw was terrifying. There were people in the room who had become victims of a maniac, and they could no longer speak or move. One of the bodies had a briefcase with a broken phone. The taxi driver instantly recognized his own phone number and regretted not calling the police in advance to avoid a similar situation. The cunning guy immediately realized that this maniac was extremely confident in himself or simply stupid, since he did not even check the contents of the bags. Taking the knife out of his pocket, Sujao realized that he would now have to end this game. In a dark and gloomy environment, events unfolded, lightning flashed everywhere, and no light penetrated into the room. At this time, the maniac walked past the rooms in search of his victims. His insidious smile covered his entire face, and he looked forward to the moment when he could deal with the poor fellows. As he continued to lick his knife, he shouted that they might try to run away, but they couldn't escape him. Looking at one of his hands, the maniac noticed that bruises appeared on it. And he realized that it was better to complete this last test as quickly as possible, because there was very little time left. Approaching one of the rooms with a knife in his hand, he anticipated what would happen next. The knife was ready for action, and the villain was ready to attack. His crazy look was terrifying, and his intentions were simply terrifying. Having entered the room, the maniac instantly discovered one of his victims, trembling with fear, trying to hide. But the man was unlucky, as he found himself in the sight of a maniac, and a terrible fate awaited him. This made the maniac extremely happy, and he shouted that he had caught his first victim. Getting closer every second, Zhao Dawei continued to shake and fear for his life. Suddenly, a silhouette of a terrible character appeared behind him with a skull mask and a giant dagger in his hands. Instantly turning around, he screamed, asking who was there, sensing that there was something behind him. But turning around, he did not see anyone, since the cunning guy managed to hide. The alarmed scoundrel realized that apparently no one else was supposed to be here. Suddenly, the knife was at his throat, threatening him. It was Sujao, who exclaimed that the maniac had been caught. The stunned scoundrel screamed because the guy suddenly scared him and outplayed him in this confrontation. Looking at his knife, the mysterious man did not know how to proceed further, fearing the consequences of this fight. However, he decided to hide the knife first and then ask his victim where he got the knife from. Approaching the door closer and closer, the scoundrel declared that it was not so easy to defeat him, only because the guy had a cooler knife. Trying with difficulty to open the door, the maniac was unable to do so, as it was locked. Not allowing him to escape, the hero came even closer and asked the maniac why he was running away, as if he had forgotten that they were hunting each other. Feeling very afraid, the maniac had sweat on his face, and Sujao kept questioning him about what happened to Mr. Killer. And the next stage should be exciting when they try to take each other's lives, and he shouldn't be afraid, because he too is a hunter. Out of great fright, the maniac dropped his knife and began to scream. Continuing to knock on the door, he shouted that no one would want to play such games, and he just wanted to satisfy his sadism, so he asked the door to be opened for him. The hero didn't think so, and stabbed him right next to the villain, which frightened him even more. The game must continue until dawn, and the maniac himself set this rule because it is fair and everyone must follow it. Falling to the floor, the frightened guy continued to shout at Sujao, although he wanted to know who he was. At that very second, the hero asked him to shut up, saying that it was time to stop talking, and now you need to feel it with your heart. Meanwhile, the villain noticed that the knife was lying next to him. Suddenly, the hero decided to strike with his blade and swung it with full force. The blow was struck right at the scoundrel's fingers, so that he would not dare touch his knife. This turn of events stunned the intruder even more, and he screamed in horror. According to what happened, Suzhou began to laugh and ordered the maniac to choose the finger that he likes the most, since something terrible awaits him before he finishes with his fingers and makes him eat them. These words caused a wave of panic in the scoundrel. His eyes began to roll back into his head, and he seemed unable to even speak anymore, frozen in one position. The system congratulated the host for stopping the killer from enjoying the last party of the rainy night. This cruel game of pleasure will meet with cruel retribution for its completion. The object of the reward was Professor Young's electric chair, the effect of which was such that no one could sit on it for more than a minute. It was a reliable interrogation partner, because endless hell awaited those sitting in the electric chair. The system then presented a question to the owner. Does he want to activate the House of Horrors? The hero thought it sounded fun and activated the feature. Sometime later, the maniac began to come to his senses. Opening his eyes, he saw something he did not expect after waking up. The villain found himself in the car and immediately began to look around, because he did not understand how exactly he ended up here. The driver was Suzhou, who announced that the dear client had finally woken up, and he screamed so loudly as if he was experiencing a nightmare. Suddenly, the stranger indignantly declared that this could not be just a nightmare, and he sought to understand where they were going. After a moment, the hero exclaimed that their destination was familiar to him. Looking around, the man could not understand how this was possible, because there were clear traces of hands on the window. There were so many of them that it filled him with horror. As it turned out, February 3rd, 2001 was worth remembering, since that day was his birthday, and his first victim was a white woman returning home after working overtime, and under the guise of a taxi driver, he kidnapped her and took her to the forest, where he committed terrible actions. This was followed by 3 consecutive disappearances associated with this so-called taxi driver, and the killer still remained at large. The hero exclaimed, urging the maniac to look back and look at his surroundings, and what he saw outside the window were traces of suffering left by the innocent victims whom he took the lives of. Many innocent people looked at him, as if trying to break through glass to him. That's why Suzhou shouted out that he welcomed him to the House of Horrors. The many arms of his victims began to stretch out behind him, as if from another reality, dragging him into the underworld. Enmeshed in this nightmare, he began to scream in pain, experiencing both emotional and physical agony. In the end, the villain felt how resentment and anger consumed his soul to the very tips of his fingers. Finally, immersed in this darkness, the villain realized that he was unable to escape from this whirlpool of evil, since he was absolutely absorbed by it. In reality, he found himself sitting in the electric chair and slowly coming to his senses. Brought to his senses, the man, looking around, realized that he was no longer in a taxi. What he saw frightened him even more, as he found himself in the electric chair. Trying to get out, he shouted that all of this must be hallucinations, and he had seen similar things before, and they were always just hallucinations. Noticing that the villain still had not come to his senses, Suzhou decided to turn on the electric chair for fun. By repeating the action on the lever, the electric chair gradually began to operate. Giant lightning erupted around the maniac, stealing his life and sanity with every second. At that moment, the hero realized how useful the professor's electric chair was. The maddened maniac shouted that Suzhou was a damned devil. Continuing to rave, he only exclaimed that they would meet in hell. At that moment, the guy did not consider himself a villain, because he committed a noble deed. Taking the life of a maniac, he remembered his dearest person, deprived of life in a cruel way. Looking at his knife, Zhao thought even deeper. Leaving the scene, he noticed at the last moment that the only one who would go to hell was a maniac. On the other hand, he was just an unfortunate victim. Approaching the taxi driver, the guy made him happy, saying that this was the end. And now they are safe, they can leave together. The taxi driver lost consciousness from extreme fright, not expecting Sujao to come to him with a knife. Meanwhile, events unfolded at the South Asian police station. The phone that belonged to Sujao rang. The worker, who was dozing tiredly, began to wake up, noticing an unexpected call. With a sleepy voice, he answered and asked Sujao what happened and why he was calling so late. As if as a joke, the guy asked if his friend would believe him if he said that he had been kidnapped by a perverted maniac. Having known a friend since childhood, who already at the age of 10 deceived a slave trader who was trying to kidnap him, he would be truly surprised if Sujao really ended up in the hands of a maniac. Suddenly, Sujao shocked his friend by saying that he had really been kidnapped. At that very second, his friend began to get dressed and said that he would invite several people and would come right away. While you are getting ready, many cars are already approaching the crime scene. The friend began to think that this was the third time this had happened in a month. Many cars surrounded the building, from which police emerged. Continuing to cry, Zhao Dawei was eternally grateful that the police were finally here. Sujao suddenly came out, undoubtedly still carrying a giant knife. The police immediately stopped him, pointing a gun and demanding that he drop the knife. His friend immediately started screaming that it was a misunderstanding, and he called the police because he was a kidnapped victim. The stunned comrade wanted to know why he was wearing such a strange outfit, since in this way he could only intimidate. To this, the hero replied that he was dressed like that because he was kidnapped right after work. Moreover, he is into cosplay, and it is normal for him to wear a cape and hold a saw in his hand. Stopping joking, Sujao wanted to know what would happen next. To a large extent, the guy was right, because this case seemed too absurd. The man had already been dead for more than 15 hours, but in fact, he was not dead, since he had been kidnapped. One of the workers carried out an analysis and concluded that the death was not related to skin diseases. Pretending that Sujao didn't understand anything, he said how strange it was that the maniac suddenly fell and he didn't think that he could be dead. He only had the assumption that the body was moving after the deprivation of life. His comrade's name was Chen Mo, and the hero thought that, judging by his look, he knew something. The guy claimed that the incident was not connected with Sujao, and even if he told, his comrade would still insist on his version. In fact, this was the fourth strange case in the last 2 months, and the previous 3 were similar. All the maniacs were killed, and he shared this information with his friend, simply because he was involved in these cases. Sujao clearly understood this. He was just a little curious. And suddenly, the system gave him a task to increase his star rating. Analysis of the hidden information showed a high score, and as a reward, he was given a butcher's cloak, and it could only be used at night, and it hid the presence of its owner, making him almost invisible, as if he became a silent ghost while wearing this cloak. As he thought about his reward, he realized that the electric chair and the butcher's coat contained something strange. A mysterious girl got out of the car that pulled up. It was a reporter who was in a hurry because the news was truly amazing. The lightning-fast girl approached the guys and began to question the inspector about how hard he worked, whether Sujao was a maniac, and why he was not in handcuffs. The lady was interested to know what the guy usually does, what prompted him to commit a crime, and what he could tell about his previous victims. Stopping the reporter, the inspector said that this guy was a victim, and he should watch his language and also stay away from the crime scene. The dumbfounded girl still wanted to get at least some information and began to carefully examine Sujao. What she saw amazed her, because she noticed that his clothes were all covered with red liquid, and he had a saw in his hands. This really shocked the girl, but as it turned out, the saw was a toy and did not have a sharp blade. A moment later, the girl was again amazed to learn that the killer was already in the car, and he was dead. The suit was covered in red liquid because Sujao was just an unlucky employee of a haunted house, Driver Zhao Dawei had also become a victim, and now they could talk to him. Walking through the crowd, the girl tried to stop the brave man to ask him a few more questions. She also sought to unravel who he really was. Sometime later, events unfolded in an amusement park. The news was already blazing with headlines about another murder in the city, and everyone was eager to find out who the killer was. Comments claimed that the killer was a medical student with a saw who may have killed out of rage over a failed exam. Others suggested that he might already be an experienced maniac, and still others believed that the killer was already dead. The stunned guy at that moment could not understand why his photo appeared in this news article. Suddenly, an unknown number rang straight to Suzhou. This was the same reporter who wanted to find out details about the events that took place. Without knowing this, the hero said that his surname is not Su. He does not need loans, does not want to buy a house, he does not have children, he does not play computer games, and does not engage in prostitution. And after that, he said goodbye. Wen Ming then exclaimed that she was a journalist yesterday and wanted to know what happened. The conversation turned out to be with Wen Ming, a reporter who was offering an exclusive interview, and she assured that it would not take much time, and they could meet Suzhou tomorrow when he was free, and she offered to pay for the dinner, hoping for his agreement. The guy didn't think the offer was too bad, but he still refused. The answer for Wen Ming was extremely unsatisfactory, and she decided to get an interview at any cost. After the guy hung up, Wen Ming started screaming, saying that he had no right to behave like that and refuse her. At that time, the guy realized that he did not have time to eat since problems had just appeared. The system suggested a new mission involving palm trees in an amusement park that would start in an hour and a half, and the hero was not allowed to fail the mission and had to hide among a sea of laughter and deal with a crazy clown to complete the task. Suzhou realized that there were no other amusement parks in Wuzhou City and remembered what Boss had said to the Fear Festival organization. The killer may have been hiding in the crowd, but he didn't have the hard evidence to convince the police to shut down the park, so it was time to take matters into his own hands. Events continued in the recreation room. Suddenly, Lil Wang rushed in, shouting that Brother Su must help him immediately. It all happened because the guy had a severe stomachache. This moment almost scared the hero to death, and he thought that something terrible had happened, and the visitor was clearly planning something evil against him. Due to the pain in his stomach, Lil Wang asked his colleague to temporarily take his place as a butcher, as he was going to visit the toilet and would be back soon. For the hero, this did not present any difficulty, and he happily agreed to help his comrade. At this time, his phone rang again. This was the woman who was extremely persistent, and the guy decided it would be easier to just turn off the phone to avoid annoying calls. Having changed into a butcher's uniform, the hero decided that it was time to get to work. I happily headed to my workplace. After some time, events unfolded in an amusement park. Visitors noticed changes in the House of Horrors compared to the previous visit, and the mad doctor from the real story appeared there. The innovation really wowed visitors, encouraging them to go and find out what was so new. Meanwhile, the hero has been thinking about what Manager Wu is thinking, using his story as a plot point, and he seems to have excellent business sense. Suzhou turned around and found visitors, as well as another stranger. In the hands of the stranger was a whip covered with thorns. The stranger himself was wearing a mask and had a crazy look. Terrible eyes immediately noticed the guy, and their gaze was riveted on him. This really amazed the hero, because he did not expect to see anyone else but himself. Looking again, the guy did not notice anyone else. And he could not imagine that there was a man in a leather suit in the House of Horrors. Since the system said that this should happen today, I had to take note. Putting aside his fear, the hero headed into the dark room to examine it. A dark room, reminiscent of a psychiatric hospital, awaited him there. Looking around, the guy didn't understand where exactly the rest of the visitors had gone. Everywhere was empty, and he kept moving to find the mysterious stranger. Entering the next room, Sujao was on guard, expecting the worst. At first, I didn't find anyone around. Suddenly, the door suddenly closed behind him. It turned out that someone had been watching him all this time. The man exclaimed, warning him not to waste his energy in vain. A greeting sounded through the speaker saying, "Welcome. The last member of Mr. Wong Def is invited to join the game." They all looked scared, and the stranger announced that the visitors were looking for a thrill by entering this house of horrors. The exit was blocked, but there is a road to the underground bomb shelter, built in 1980. To get out, 5 of them have to find a way out of the maze, meeting monsters along the way. Suddenly, Hero raised hand. Apologizing for any inconvenience, he stated that whoever introduced himself as Wong Defoy was wrong because he is not that person. The stranger reacted indignantly, claiming that everything was calculated and this guy should have been at work. It turned out that Lil Wang had a stomachache and he asked Sujao to replace him. This did not matter to the stranger, and he ordered everyone to go inside. The visitors were amazed by what was happening and did not understand whether to follow the stranger's instructions. Then the hero suggested that the announcer was a criminal this time. But he even got permission to replace Lil. They decide to follow the announcer's instructions because they can't seem to get back to the House of Horrors. If all visitors listen to her, she promises that everyone will leave this place safe. Looking at the girl, the hero did not understand how she ended up here. All the visitors watched in surprise as the girl tried to command. The woman approached the little girl and asked her not to worry, as they would protect her. The little girl replied that she was not a little girl and was not joking. To summarize, each of them ended up here after visiting a haunted house, which could mean that someone is tracking them through video cameras, and their enemies may be working as a team. Everyone will have to look around and try to find a weapon for self-defense. The girl assumed that there were video cameras installed everywhere to monitor them as soon as they left. Therefore, the first step is to find and destroy the CCTV cameras. This will significantly reduce the level of threat, and they will be able to get out by moving in a group and quietly investigating their surroundings. At this time, the adults began to discuss the girl's words. It turned out that she was a 3rd grader who had watched over 1,000 episodes of detective anime and had extensive experience watching investigative series. Sujao decided to express his position, shouting that if the killer is his bro, then he invites him to kill him, since he has insurance and he can gain a lot by crippling him or lose nothing by killing him. This stunned everyone present, since no one expected the guy to utter such words. Unfortunately, no one responded to his invitation. Then the girl decided to accuse the guy of being an idiot, saying that killers only act this way in his dreams. And if his screams attract a killer, he can kill everyone. And now even the girl herself is screaming. If he understood, he should not attract their attention. He should follow the girl and follow her orders. Together, they began to slowly make their way out of the room. Apparently, there was no one there, and the hero invited everyone to go to the right, and he himself went to the left, but the girl warned that those left behind most often die. Smart Sujao knew not to worry because in horror films, those who died behind were always minor characters, and the main character never died. The girl did not leave, and she was amazed by this answer. After all, she didn't know what the hero was really hiding behind himself. In addition, this rule also applies to their enemy. Seeing the knife, the girl immediately remembered the hero, and she said this man was making headlines, a serial killer on a rainy night. People were even more shocked because they thought it was a killer posing as an employee. But the news said the gunman was dead and he couldn't be the killer, one man suggested. They all continued to look at the guy who stood with his back to them, speechless. At this time, Sujao was thinking about what to do next. It turned out that observers were watching everything that happened through surveillance cameras. The mysterious man noticed an interesting guy, but did not yet know how long he could maintain his cool. Suddenly, the unknown person noticed how this interesting guy disappeared from sight. Although the hero was not entirely sure, this cloak was supposed to completely hide his presence here. Walking down the corridor, he noticed something very strange. Everyone heard this sound, and it caused them great fear. Then, the girl assumed that the killers are using this sound to attract them, but there is no need to worry, and this means that they are moving in the right direction, and no one normal will go towards the sound. The hero was the one who finally went towards the sound. The sound came from one of the slightly open doors of the room. Entering the room, the guy found a girl crying and sobbing loudly. Coming closer, Sujao wanted to know why this little girl was crying at night instead of going to sleep. It turned out that this child was completely special. The girl smiled with all her heart and asked her uncle to save her. Taking out his knife, the hero shouted that she should be called his big brother. This girl's head turned 360 degrees, but she didn't even move. This clearly upset the girl, and they expected the visitors to be ordinary people who feared death, but in front of her stood some strange man. Taking the girl by the hand, the hero wanted to understand what she was doing here and why she was here alone. Coming closer, the guy still realized that she was just an ordinary girl, and he already thought that he had seen a ghost, which in itself scared him. Suddenly, the guy realized that this girl was with a corpse that threatened living people and could take their lives. Summoning the electric chair, Sujao invited the little girl to sit in it. At that time, people continued to move along the corridor, hearing an even more terrifying scream. Because of this, they turned around and wanted to understand what could be screaming so furiously. The sound grew louder, and they felt like something was approaching them. That guy never came back, and maybe they should have gone and seen what happened. The other guy suggested that they should forget about him. A mysterious voice said that this was a bomb shelter, reminiscent of an urban legend. This all happened somewhere in the 80s, with a chainsaw killer living in a bomb shelter, and they suspected that this was the same bomb shelter. The frightened couple asked to stop scaring them, because all this was in the 80s, and he should have died a long time ago. However, they still had to keep moving. One of the guys saw that the exit was to the side where the door was. Rejoicing at this, the couple decided to see if there really was a way out. Within a moment, the little girl immediately stopped them. But the adults ignored her warning and began to open a door. When it opened, a very special and intense smell was heard. The sight of what they saw literally shocked everyone. There were many people there, absolutely motionless and not breathing. A piercing scream was heard from the room. No one could believe their eyes, imagining that someone was capable of such a thing. The only one who did not lose her calm was the girl, and there were many bodies there. As she came closer, she realized that something incredible had happened in this place. And she immediately began to think about how so many people could be hidden under an amusement park, and the smell became even more intense, indicating poor ventilation and a dead end. A labyrinth-like place where all the paths are interconnected, it was a mystery how they could get into this room. Fearing a negative outcome, the girl immediately shouted that they urgently needed to leave. And she was right, because it turned out to be a trap. An unknown guy injected sleeping pills into everyone except the girl, leaving her conscious. The attacker took advantage of his cunning plan and injected the girl. Everything before her eyes instantly became dim, and she lost the ability to stand on her feet. Falling to the floor, she thought about when this maniac appeared here. Unfortunately, she also fell to the floor and lost her ability to resist. It turns out that one of the guys shouldn't have joined their group, and now the swineherd and the butcher believe that this group is the same as the last one. Without losing consciousness, the girl heard everything and was shocked. The impudent man was preparing to make his first move by embroidering pigs' heads onto their faces so that they would remain in this trap. The cloudiness in her eyes continued, and the girl gradually lost consciousness. At this time, the guy was thinking about how these guys decided that they could kill by relying on instincts, and he was still not clear how they received the invitation from Mr. Song. Now only the coward who ran away at the very beginning remains. An unknown person in a mask watched what was happening in the electric chair. He didn't understand who Sujao was, where he came from, and where this electric chair came from, and perhaps he was doing the same thing as them. It seemed like the girl really didn't know anything and wasn't just refusing to talk. Then the hero decided that he needed to interview someone else. Suddenly, an unknown person stepped on a tin can. There was a violent shaking as the can began to bend under his weight. The guy heard this sound and turned around to find out who was there. At this moment, his surprise was boundless, since someone was really hiding here, and, in his opinion, there was no need to be shy. It was time to go out and have a good time. One of the maniacs immediately decided to run away, fearing the same thing. The unshakable guy continued to pursue the fugitive, trying to understand what was happening here. The unknown person began to warn and ask not to approach. He then argued that they were doing the same thing, and there was no point in killing each other. This aroused the interest of the hero, and he decided to find out what exactly this stranger was doing, and he repeated that he was a murderer, and the hero himself was just a victim. The stranger instantly realized that the victim would not pursue the killer with a knife. From Sujao, which they somehow ignored, and there was also a girl without eyes, and the guy wanted to find out if she was part of the team. The mysterious man was shocked that the guy was able to look her in the face, and he asked her many questions, but she knew nothing. In horror, the villain shouted that this was impossible, since no one could live a normal life after looking at her face. In the end, it turned out that the girl was really not a person. Continuing to scream, the attacker could not understand how this was even possible, since no one had done this before. Sometime later, the unknown person came to his senses. Looking around, he discovered that he himself was sitting in an electric chair and completely tied up. Smiling, the hero announced that now he would feel the same as his partner. At this time, another criminal wandered along the corridor and tried to find the swineherd, believing that catching one person would not be a difficult task. Approaching one of the rooms, he saw that a bright light was burning behind the door. Opening the door, the criminal found Sujao and his partner, who had already received punishment. This shocked the villain even more, as he couldn't expect what he saw. The smart guy immediately realized that this scoundrel had returned all alone and wanted to find out why. The stunned scoundrel tried to figure out whether Sujao really did this to his partner. And this was so, and he had no choice, and he was forced to show some resistance because he was trying to kill the main character. The criminal instantly realized the need to change his role and announced to his accomplice that he was an incredible person, and the hero, in turn, emphasized that their case was not yet completed, and he must have accomplices, asking about the whereabouts of the rest of the people. With an ominous smile on his face, the villain hid a syringe with sleeping pills behind his back, developing an answer on the fly. Suddenly, the guy shouted that it was time to stop playing, since he had revealed himself long ago, and his actions, thoughts, and facial expressions left no room for doubt, and there was no point in pretending to be a victim. With a clear advantage, the hero drew his knife without hesitation. The unknown young man instantly decided to run away because he knew that it was better for him to sneak away, and he always relied on his mind and was not going to engage in close combat with this psycho. At this time, Sujao believed that it was rude to leave immediately after the events, and he considered himself innocent and harmless. Suddenly, a notification from the system appeared as he continued to pursue the villain. Unfortunately, the system indicated that the mission was only half completed. Soon, an unknown knock was heard, as if someone was approaching. It turned out to be an unidentified creature, which was getting closer every second. The huge monster came straight towards Suzhou, looking as if it was about to strike. At this time, the villain laughed, because it turned out to be a local resident using his secret and perfect weapon. Another Frankenstein-like monster has appeared, but the hero himself began to smile and asked if he really thought that this could scare him. Spreading the giant chainsaw, the hero shouted, inviting him to attack. The system congratulated its owner for receiving a new chainsaw item, and once the diesel engine drives the saw chain, he can immediately become the most impressive person on the street. The scoundrel clearly did not expect such a development of events and was afraid of the consequences of the hero's appearance of a saw. And he thought, perhaps this is the same legendary killer with a chainsaw, and it seemed to him that he was definitely connected with Mr. Song. And where did he get this saw? As if he pulled it out of his underpants. The distraught guy decided that this might mean that this guy is one of Mr. Song's men. At the same time, the hero was curious about Mr. Song, and he wanted the guy to understand that he was not a chainsaw killer, not a monster, but just an ordinary person who felt great. The scoundrel clearly did not like this answer, and this only increased his anger. In response to this, he ordered the butcher to ensure that the hero lost his life, ordering an attack. Meanwhile, the brave guy decided to see which of them would emerge victorious. Literally a few minutes later, the butcher was already defeated on the floor. His head ended up under Suzhou's foot. It was the leg of Suzhou the giant, who looks strong on the outside but turns out to be weak on the inside, and this is what he does. Trembling with fear, the villain did not know what to expect now. Continuing to scream, he ran at full speed, hoping that they would not catch up with him. And the hero, realizing that his clothes were covered with red liquid, realized that it was time to change his outfit. Sometime later, the police arrived at the scene and stopped right outside the building. All people were ordered to stay away from this location. This was the place where the signal disappeared. The entrance to the shelter was discovered, and the search party was already preparing to leave. An investigation into the disappearance of a man at an amusement park may have connections to events 3 years ago. The safety of the hostages has become a top priority, so departure is planned when everyone is ready. The police, accompanied by the chief police officer, headed to the scene. They had to be on guard because something was moving in their direction. Strange sounds began to be heard as if something was approaching. It was the same scoundrel who was delighted to see the police on his way. He literally threw himself at the man's feet, announcing that he was waiting for his comrades and was extremely glad that they were here. Chen Mo, in turn, assured that the guy was now safe and in no danger. An experienced policeman intended to interrogate him to find out where the others were, whether he was the only one who managed to escape, and where the initiator was. The guy did not deny his guilt at all and admitted that he should be arrested, and the situation requires urgent action. This turn of events truly surprised the man, as he could not understand how this could even happen. He was starting to worry, given the culprit's strange request for his arrest, and it seemed like a ridiculous plot twist. The frightened guy asked not to pay attention to this, explaining that Mr. Kopp must know that after 10 years, the killer with a chainsaw has returned, right behind him, and therefore it is necessary to hurry up and apprehend him. Suddenly, someone else began to appear from the darkness. But it was not the same killer with a chainsaw, but a completely different person. Suddenly, Suzhou struck the villain from behind, and he began to mock him, showing his cunning, even turning to the police for protection. The policeman immediately recognized his friend and realized that he worked exactly here, and now he began to understand what had happened, and Suzhou noticed that this was convenient, since now there was no need to waste time searching for all the missing people. and they had to send someone to look for them. In addition, another case of the appearance of the walking dead was recorded. Upon entering the room, Zhao was eager to show his comrade the location. At that time, someone was found in a semi-conscious state in one of the rooms. It turned out that it was the same little girl lying on the floor with her eyes open. She was immediately taken away to be moved to safety. Sometime later, the little traveler came to her senses. The woman approached her, asked if she had been asleep, and then expressed interest in her well-being. The little girl ended up in the hospital. They had already identified the culprit, and now she was safe. Memories began to flood back to her, and she wanted to know what happened. Jumping up sharply from the bed, the girl asked who the fair-haired employee from the Phantom House was. It turns out that this man is also in the hospital, as he was the only victim who did not lose consciousness and is now being questioned by the police. Everyone else also woke up, but their mental state is not very good, and the little girl is extremely strong. That guy was the only one who didn't lose consciousness, and it seems he saved them. The police also thought he was amazing because he single-handedly dealt with 3 tough criminals, something that an ordinary person would not be able to do, and they previously considered him a victim in a previous case and even suspected him of his involvement. The little girl was able to survive because the guy found her in time. When the woman returned, she did not find the girl. It was as if she had disappeared. Meanwhile, someone on the street started shouting at the main character to stop. Turning around, he noticed that a girl was standing behind him and decided to introduce himself to her. She was told that he was the only survivor who did not lose consciousness during the killer incident at the amusement park. Having not come up with anything better, the hero replied that he was just lucky and was in the right place at the right time. The little lady seemed to feel that he had deceived everyone, but there was always only one truth. Suzhou begged her not to leave the hospital unnoticed and come back, and now she is the only one who knows his true identity, because everyone who was with her has lost their minds. She sought to understand why the guy decided to break up with them from the very beginning, and how he managed to avoid the attack of the killers and solve both murders in a row. Then she assumed that Suzhou was the organizer of this whole game, and everything happened according to his will. The idea that the reason he spared her was her childhood led her to consider him a lolicon. She decided to keep an eye on him, believing that she had found his weakness, and she was determined to prove that he was the mastermind before completing her mission. She is forced to follow him with no other choice, and Suzhou introduced her as Lil Yingying, but his disapproving glance silenced her and moved on. Lil Yingying wanted to know if Suzhou felt disappointed seeing him make his plans. Suddenly, the hero was faced with another task. She grabbed the guy and ordered him not to leave because she had not yet completed her mission. But he didn't care about her orders because he had important things to do, and the children should go to bed early. The girl again realized that he was hatching the idea of the perfect crime and was probably furious that there was someone who saw him playing the role of the victim. She assumed that this was the only way he got pleasure. At that moment, a woman appeared, shouting that she had finally found the girl and ordered her to return. Lil Yingying screamed, demanding to be released, declaring that she was not sick and wanted to see her boss and to be discharged. Fortunately, at that moment the hero was saved by the fact that the girl did not have time to tell anything. Suddenly, someone else approached the guy. The reporter wanted to know from the gentleman why he did not answer her calls. Unfortunately, the hero no longer remembered who this girl was and what her name was. She introduced herself, saying that she was a journalist and had called 47 times. Then the hero explained that he blocked her, so she couldn't get through. This answer angered the girl even more, but she knew that she needed to restrain her emotions and urgently calm down. Pulling out her phone, she pressed it to the guy's head and began asking questions: how he became the victim of 2 murders in a row, and why he met the killer face to face twice, and whether he had anything to do with these cases. She also wanted to find out whether he communicated with the killer, whether he belonged to some organization that controlled them. But the guy only said that he did not know. The stunned girl wanted to know if the hero was hiding something, and it seemed to her that it was too unlikely that he managed to survive 2 murder cases. Moreover, her investigation revealed that there were numerous massacres taking place in the city, some of which continue to this day, and now the same thing has happened again. Su Zhao realized that it happened again, and she meant those dead people. The reporter continued to ask the gentleman how he managed to remain unharmed after encounters with the killers, and whether he could still claim that he understood absolutely nothing. Suddenly, the girl decided to show something on her phone. Seeing the article, the hero asked if she was trying to increase his popularity, and if so, then it would only benefit him. Shaking her phone, the woman began to tell him that he should guess what would happen if she published this article. A few seconds later, the hero pinned her against the wall and asked if she was a journalist named Wen Ming. He then explained that, first of all, he didn't block her phone, but just turned off his own. If she really called that many times, she would definitely notice it. Secondly, as a journalist, wouldn't it be better to use him as a criminal instead of writing an article about him being a victim? Su Zhao didn't even mention that he was giving an interview, and she had many shortcomings, and he claimed that she presented herself well, but it was not for nothing that he said that he didn't know her from the very beginning, because she was not the same at all who he claims to be. Then the woman said that, as expected from a person who was able to defeat the killers, she had not met such an interesting and talented person as him for a long time. This turn of events pleased the hero because he definitely hit the mark. This girl turned out to be quite pathetic because she immediately confessed after he was pranked. With her level of intelligence, she shouldn't even think about high-profile crimes. And her cosplay was good, but false, which really made me laugh. Suddenly, the girl started screaming for him to shut up, and she seemed extremely annoyed. Meanwhile, another woman from the police approached them. She noticed that the guy was talking to himself for a long time, and he needed to return to the hospital for examination, and besides, he was slapping the wall when no one was around. Turning around, Su Zhao actually saw that there was no one around him. This shocked him because he could not expect that he was talking to a ghost. Suddenly, the guy noticed that someone was watching him nearby. It turned out to be a puppet character, like a child's toy. Then he decided to calm the girl down, saying that everything was fine, and apologized for the disturbance, explaining that he was just rehearsing a comedy skit. At the same time, he was aware that he seemed to have gotten himself into something annoying, but he needed to prioritize his current mission. The dark night had fallen, and the hero was preparing to complete his mission. The mysterious passenger began to move along the road and stopped near the bus. Without a word to the driver, the unknown guy entered the bus. The driver immediately set off, continuing his route. A friendly man who noticed the guy asked if he was leaving work too late, since it was the last bus for the day. However, this guy turned out to be not so friendly. He had a knife in his hand. The bus engine suddenly stopped, and the vehicle stopped, and the unknown guy began to slowly creep up on the careless man. A scream was heard throughout the street, from which even the cats began to run. 2 silent girls stood in a dark alley. Next to them was a guy with a cat approaching him. Seeing him, the girls suddenly sat down on the ground, as if scared. They then started screaming, saying that they were lost and asking Su Zhao for help. The hero watched them carefully, drawing conclusions. In addition, one of the sisters suffered a sprained ankle, and they were literally begging for help. The guy agreed with pleasure because he liked to help. Taking out his bag, he said that he seemed to have bandages. This turn of events delighted the girls, and they began to closely monitor how the hero was distracted. One of the girls took out scissors and walked towards the hero to make an unexpected blow. And so, near the hero's bag, there were huge scissors. He apologized to the girls, saying that there was too much stuff in his bag. The giant scissors and rope in his bag made him even stranger to the girls. At that time, Suzhou diligently pretended to be looking for bandages. Suddenly, another girl noticed that the hero was leaving behind hidden traces. At this time, the girls decided to give up. One of them stated that she was already better and did not want to create trouble. For the hero, this was unpleasant, since he should not have been so polite, and he finally found what he had been looking for so long. The uncle, searching for his chainsaw, asked the girls to remain still so he could heal them. They got lost in a dead end, and it was extremely funny, especially considering their attempts to contact the depraved pervert. One of the girls immediately began to attack and ordered the other to do the same. At this time, her sister ran away in horror, as it was very scary. Thus, they found out that the girl had a fake friend, and it was a very sad sight. Sometime later, the girl knelt down and begged not to kill her, ready to tell everything, even the size of their bodies. But no one paid attention to this, and another question arose. Why was the Yan'an area so active today? And it seemed that all the demons were out for a walk. The excited girl began to say that there was a very important party tonight, and all they had to do was kill a random passerby, take part of his body, and leave on the last bus of Route 870, and only then would they be able to get a ticket to the party. All the killers from the Yan'an area were invited, and the hero wanted to understand what kind of party the killer could organize. The girl feigned innocence and claimed that she had already told everything, and she even suggested that the hero was older than her and therefore should let her go. Suddenly, the hero has a task called a night hunt, the difficulty of which was unknown. And tonight there is a party planned, and he will join it, and he must decide whether to hunt ordinary people or murderers. And the punishment for failure is the disappearance of several people from the area Yan'an every year. Looking at the killer, he wanted to know what she thought about this. But as soon as the guy was distracted, the girl immediately ran away. Suddenly, someone threw a knitting needle at her, aiming for her neck. Once inside, the girl was stunned, not understanding what happened and who did it. Then several more tiny knitting needles were thrown, invisible to the eye. They all hit the target exactly and found it out. Having fallen to the floor, the criminal could no longer move as the spokes hit special points. It turned out that it was Lil Yingying who stole ketamine from the hospital, and it turned out to be extremely effective, and Suzhou was never able to get rid of her, because this is only possible in his dreams. The same bus was moving towards its destination all this time. At that time, the criminal was holding a knife at the driver's throat. Guessing game with him, where the driver's life was at stake. These words frightened the man even more, and he continued to drive the bus with difficulty. At this time, Suzhou appeared in front of the bus with a mysterious girl. The driver and the killer stopped the bus, and the criminal hit his head on the glass. This happened thanks to the exceptional driving skill of the noble man, who managed to stop the bus without hitting pedestrians. Suzhou sent the girl to look for her friends and change the situation so that she would not get lost again. The hero told the man that he only needed to enter the data into the machine, and he would take care of the rest. The man, looking at the hero's backpack, discovered something fascinating, but agreed with him. The guy stressed that he had nothing to worry about, as he had no intentions towards the man, as he was not on his list of targets. Meanwhile, the villain continued to sit in his place, thinking about how he could take revenge on the guy for getting in his way. Completely unshakable, Suzhou sat right next to the scoundrel, stunning him. Worried about his life, the guy immediately asked if the new alien was one of them. The astute guy noticed that if you kill the driver, then who will take them to the party? And then the unknown person admitted that he got on the bus before he purchased the ticket, and it seems that he was not prohibited from using one of his friends as a ticket. The brazen killer invited his comrade to play a guessing game by pulling out a knife and putting it to his throat. The brave hero immediately guessed that this maniac's name was Riddler, and this only increased his indignation. It didn't really matter what he was called, since his puzzles had been solved on underground forums, and it was doubtful he could come up with anything new. Then, the hero suggested to the maniac that he should ask the question and answer it himself. For the villain, this was really interesting, because there was no riddle in this world that he could not solve, and if the hero loses, then trouble awaits him. At this moment, the hero decided to ask a question, emphasizing how important it is to listen carefully, and ask the maniac what 2 minus 1 is. This question angered the maniac, and he thought that the guy was addressing him as an idiot, because it was a simple mathematical question. 2 minus 1 equals 1. However, the answer was incorrect because the edge of the table has 2 sides, and after cutting it has 3 sides. So the correct answer is 3. And it can't be a simple math question because his answer was wrong. The scoundrel was indignant, saying that this did not count, and offered to play again. The smart guy asked the question again, clarifying to listen carefully, and asked what 2 minus 1 is. Answering with caution, the maniac said that it was 3. This answer also turned out to be incorrect, because there would have been only one correct answer, and this villain, who considered himself smart, still fell into a simple trap. The enraged maniac shouted that he was being mocked and promised to kill his victim. But he did not expect that it would not be so easy, and the hero stood up, taking out his blade. Now he was in the role of a mystery man, and had already captured the mind of a maniac from the first question, and for the second question he could take his hand, and the time had come for the third question. The hero again asked what 2 minus 1 was, and if the maniac answered incorrectly, his life would be lost. The maniac noticed that he no longer wanted to participate in the game, and admitted that he was an idiot and did not want to solve riddles anymore. Meanwhile, the bus stopped at the next stop, where a mysterious girl appeared. Her umbrella consisted of many parts, and her clothes were a national Chinese costume. The girl seemed completely ordinary, but her look was absolutely crazy. The fearful man tried to understand what the mysterious girl was looking at so fixedly, and if she just needed to get on the bus, then he should hurry. And in the end, he already felt that he didn't care, and if something terrible happened, he'll just die here. At this time, the girl was thinking about how courageous the bus driver was and was looking forward to an interesting party, and so she decided to join the trip. The lady noticed that there were 2 guys nearby. This inspired her even more, and she began to smile, watching them closely. As she came closer, Sujao asked the lady to sit in another seat and stay away from him. Hearing that she was called Aunt, the girl smiled even brighter. The guy immediately admitted that maybe he was mistaken, and maybe she still looks young, and maybe he should call her grandmother instead of aunt. Closing the umbrella, the aunt said that he did not know who he was talking to, or maybe he was just eager to become part of her collection. The brave guy said that he didn't want to be a sweet child in his grandmother's collection. The girl again exclaimed that there was no need to call her grandmother, and Auntie was also not welcome. The guy didn't care at all, and he continued to insist, calling her grandmother. The unknown girl began to tremble with anger. She then pulled out a blade from her umbrella and shouted that she would kill him right now. The unshakable guy remained in his place all this time and did not even move. Literally a second later, he took out his chainsaw and wanted to use it. What she saw truly amazed the girl, and she sharply slowed down. After all, the grandmother did not expect that the guy would have a huge chainsaw ready for any action. Looking at this weapon, she could not understand several things: why the saw was glowing red and where he got it from. For several minutes, they continued to look at each other and were completely silent. As if nothing had happened, the girl took her umbrella. Soon, she resolutely walked away from the place where she stood. The bus continued moving, heading to the next stop. Another passenger boarded the bus and asked if it was a murder lounge. This guy had heard that they were all top assassins, so he wanted to see if they dared to fight him. There was not a single answer to his question. Everyone was silent and just looked at him. The newcomer didn't care and ordered Sujao to stand up and fight him. A few minutes later, there were screams, and the guy begged not to hit him in the face. The beaten newcomer sat in his seat and cried in defeat. The bus stopped at the bus stop again, waiting for the next passenger. In walked another killer with scissors, a modern-day Jack the Ripper. All this time, the driver heard a fight going on behind him. But despite this, he continued to move forward unwaveringly. Many people had gathered at the stop, waiting for new passengers to enter the cabin. Suddenly, the hero had a new mission, Master of Assassins, which he successfully completed. Stopping at the next station, another guy entered. He immediately attracted attention by walking loudly. This man amazed everyone with his presence. Even the hero was slightly surprised. The unknown man carefully watched everyone. His gaze was like that of a madman. Walking through the salon, he immediately drew attention to the newcomer Sujao. However, he soon walked past him without saying anything. The guy's neighbor said that this newcomer was doomed, since not a single victim of this master lived to see tomorrow. At the same moment, another short girl entered, wondering why the bus was so quiet today. Looking around the entire salon, she tried to figure out what was happening here. Taking off her mask, the hero recognized her. Sitting her on his lap, he wanted to understand why she followed him. It turned out that this was supposed to be a surprise, and the guy shouldn't think that he could get rid of her easily. The angry hero ordered her to stop joking, explaining that this was not a bus to kindergarten, and she should leave it immediately. But the door was carefully closed, and she didn't care where the bus was going, so he couldn't force her to get off. This girl is now a hostage, and the hostages must be with the kidnapper 24/7. But the guy didn't care much about that, and he asked the man if he could stop the bus. The bus stopped again at the nearest stop. The kind guy dropped off his pursuer and moved on. The door closed in front of the girl, and she watched the bus drive away. In response, she screamed, cursing Sujao. After some time, the bus stopped again at the next stop. Someone suddenly ran ahead, and the driver noticed it. A mysterious passenger in a raincoat entered the bus, his face remaining hidden. He was wearing a robe that covered his figure and was impossible to recognize. The unknown person announced that this was the final stop, and everyone needed to get out and follow him. All together, they went after the mysterious stranger. The driver also had to get out, but he was overcome by fear. The hero stopped him and advised him to abandon the idea of escaping. The driver was horrified and begged to let him go because he was just an ordinary bus driver with a family he needed to feed. The smart guy asked him to speak more quietly. In his eyes, he looked like an ordinary bus driver, and they thought that he was one of them, and if he ran away, he would impersonate a person, and then something terrible might happen. Meanwhile, one of the maniacs was going to kill him for daring to humiliate him as soon as the opportunity arose. The girl turned around to see what was happening and saw the hero hugging the driver. The driver looked at the girl, and she noticed that his eyes were sparkling. The girl began to be afraid of him, as if he was directing his gaze at her, and Sujao formed an alliance with the driver. The driver decided to get used to his role. He needed to look fierce, rolling his eyes without closing them completely. Events unfolded in a dark alley where everyone was heading. Everyone followed the mysterious man. Their guiding star was an invitation to the salon. Suddenly, the entire alley was lit up with a bright purple light. The shining light engulfed all the maniacs, murderers, and even the poor driver. All the light was focused on one person standing on the stage. This man was wearing a mask and greeted everyone. Everyone realized that this scoundrel is Mr. Song. The swineherd and his gang had mentioned this Mr. before, but the hero did not yet know who he really was. Mr. noticed that he had a lot of new friends today and decided to greet the newcomers. Now they decided to throw a game to spice up the party. The villains were jubilant as they were about to play with someone's life. The girl who was captured did not understand what to do. This woman, being a journalist or an imposter, is somehow related to Mr. Song. She was looking for evidence to expose their party, but her fate was different. As an opening act, Song decided to find out which killer was ready to demonstrate his skills. The villains happily shouted that they were ready and began preparing to go on stage. Sujao expressed his outrage, calling it crude and vulgar, and claiming that it could not be called art. The maniacs turned around to see who said it, and were shocked. Even Mr. turned to see who dared to contradict him. And he realized that this newcomer had his own unique vision. If so, then he can go on stage and show what real beauty is. Everyone made way for him, and the hero boldly headed onto the stage. The fear in the girl's eyes was visible to the naked eye. She was afraid of losing her life in this vile place. Coming closer, the guy just smiled and thought about what he should do. Next to the place where the girl was tied up, there was a small first aid kit with various medicines. Two completely different people collided on the same stage, and the guy asked Mr. if he could start his performance, and to this question he received the answer that he could start at any time he wanted. But then the hero explained that he needed the necessary tools because he was not as vulgar as those who would just kill a girl. The maniacs present were upset by this because they did not understand who this imposter was and who he thought he was, why he was acting so arrogantly. This brat irritated everyone, so the whole crowd wanted to finish him off. In turn, the Mr. stopped them and wanted to listen to the newcomer. Song decided to find out what he needed and whether the tools available here were not enough. But only a brainless killer would use such low-grade tools, and Mr. must have her phone, so he asked him to hand it over. It turned out that the villain had already manipulated her phone, and her location could not be tracked. A moment later, Sujao began his lecture, urging everyone to listen carefully, explaining that if you only need her body, then at best you will become a third-class killer. True murder requires you to remove it from your heart. First, the cunning guy decided to fill the basket with many goods worth a huge amount. She must buy all the items in her cart in cash, continuing to buy until she can order no more. You should then set up a variety of random loans through apps, apply for the maximum loan from each one, and then donate the money to charity. After this, post photos related to her on dating sites and spread her personal information across various social media platforms to expose her as a masochist. Finally, he finished, and it was truly worse than murder. All the spectators were shocked by what was happening, and no one could believe their eyes that this was even possible. Song could be seen smiling when he saw this. Then he started clapping, because this method of psychological pressure was a very interesting way to make her die from embarrassment. At that time, the hero thought that in this way he could earn her trust, and now her safety is guaranteed, and all that remains is to wait for the development of events. Suddenly, someone called Mr. Song. As he walked onto the stage, this man began to share information, as if suspecting something unusual. The guy watching all this also felt that something was wrong here. Mr. apologized for interrupting the festivities, announcing that he had important messages to convey. Then the mysterious man said that there was a traitor among them. Showing his phone, which had a message about a traitor, he suggested ending the party. Spectators immediately began to demand to find the traitor and destroy him. Song really liked this outcome, and he agreed with the proposed conditions. At this very time, there was a strong knock on the door, and someone tried to get inside. This was one of the most famous and terrible killers. namely the one that does not leave its victims alive until dawn. Everyone immediately advised Mr. Spy to surrender voluntarily. Suzhou understood that they didn't even know about him. It seemed that his performance had worked, and they really believed that he was one of them. And they had to thank him for the sacrifice, Miss Journalist. Even if no problems arise now, sooner or later, the truth will become clear. Suddenly, Mr. Song asked the newcomer if he had any creative ideas. Pulling out his electric chair, he announced that a short interrogation was all they needed to identify the spy. Even Mr. was amazed that he got the electric chair, and where did this guy even get one? All maniacs could go through this, because this is just a regular electric shock session, and who knows, maybe some will even be delighted with it. Besides, they only have to endure this for a few minutes, but the spy will not dare to sit on this chair. The boy decided to ask Mr. Song what he thought about it. Understanding that until the tension reaches a certain level, anyone who sits on the chair will not be able to move for half a day. Mr. did admit that he uses a simple but effective method in such moments, realizing that this guy is truly reckless and that it could work. The guy then asked which one of them wanted to be the first to test his electric chair, and if there were no volunteers, he would choose a random person from the audience. Suddenly, one of the men shouted that he was ready to confess, and he really admitted that he was a spy, and murderers like them commit various crimes, and sooner or later they receive the punishment they deserve. The weak man asked for mercy, so Song ordered him to be caught. Noticing this, the other man also began to worry. They stood back to back, shouting that they couldn't let each other die because they were both spies. One had been undercover for a year. Another was from the narcotics department in a nearby town and had been undercover for 3 months. And the third also turned out to be a spy and decided there were too many of them on one side. As expected, there were many traitors in this group, and Mr. said that a cleanup needed to be done. All the killers wanted to prevent the police from trying to leave here alive, because now there were more of them, but the cops were also ready to fight to the end, since the headquarters had already been warned, and the main thing was to hold on, because help was already close. This really angered Mr., and he looked at everyone with contempt. Suddenly, the hero himself raised his hand, declaring that he, too, wanted to admit that he was a spy. This fact amazed everyone, and it became clear to them that they needed to act. All the maniacs started claiming that it was a misunderstanding, and they were just random newbies who happened to wander in here to clean out the drain. Because of this, one of the villains began to leave, saying that he did not belong here. An ominous maniac came out to meet him, waving his cutlasses, and the guy tried to stop him, saying that he had nothing to do with this and should not participate in it. The guy dodged the incredibly powerful blow and began to strive to get out of this place as quickly as possible. They all fought with each other, taking their own lives in this stormy fight. While the fighters fought each other, Song shouted to the executioner to protect him, because this was the end. The main villain jumped off the stage and quickly ran in an unknown direction. The hero took out a chainsaw and rejoiced at the upcoming battle. No matter, he decided to deal with these guys first before looking for Mr. Song. Meanwhile, the main scoundrel was running as fast as he could. Taking off his mask, he wanted to get some fresh air, tired from running. Soon, he got rid of her altogether to avoid suspicion of his leadership. Not knowing what to do next, the man was dumbfounded and could not understand why everything had gotten so out of control and how the situation had suddenly gotten out of hand. Entering one of the rooms, he instantly realized that all the events were caused by the guy who delivered the electric chair. He doesn't care anymore, and the executioner himself had to execute the condemned. Now all he had to do was take the puppet with him. But everything turned out to be more complicated because someone was already standing behind the villain. And this was the main character holding a huge chainsaw in his hands. In horror, the maniac turned around to see who was behind him. The brave hero responded by attacking with a chainsaw, and the leader realized that he had been under surveillance for a long time. Falling to the ground in despair, the villain began to beg for mercy and help. Suzhou at that time remarked that there was no point in rushing because he still had many questions for Mr. The villain at the same time ordered the puppet to hurry up and kill him right now. This really startled the guy because he didn't expect it. After a moment, the puppet took on a furious form. Its eyes turned red, and it was in the mood to attack. At the same instant, the impudent puppet received a blow to the head with a chainsaw. She immediately screamed in pain, not expecting such a response. This confirmed that what was standing in front of him was the same puppet from the hospital, capable of transforming into other people. This also meant that this man was really the one leading the investigation, and then Song realized that standing in front of him was the guy who had solved both of these cases. The hero did not at all resemble the man depicted in the photograph that the journalist gave him. These speculations were real stupidity, because the hero looked much more attractive than the man in the photograph. Hearing this, Mr. immediately realized that this whole story was a trap to attract him from the very beginning. He's really deceived, but he took out a knife and decided to resist, not wanting to allow everything to happen according to someone else's rules. Suddenly, the hero pulled out a pill from his pocket, and instantly throwing it into the villain's mouth, he immediately swallowed it. The pill seemed to be stuck in his throat, and the villain could not move until the drug was removed. Fearing the consequences, Song wanted to know what kind of medicine they gave him. These pills were indeed extremely interesting because they were provided by the system. One tablet is enough to make a person see all their worst fears. This drug is ideal for those who want to get rid of evidence or kill someone during a family trip. The effect of the pill really began to overwhelm the offender, and he lost his mind. In front of him loomed the blurred silhouette of a hero who looked at him with gloating. Meanwhile, the earth began to shake beneath them, as if an earthquake had begun. At the same moment, the scoundrel noticed that someone was approaching him. There were a lot of menacing and muscular guys who were only in swimming trunks. This sight frightened Mr. Song greatly, and it seemed to have caused his greatest fear. He literally begged these guys to wait so they wouldn't come any closer. The guys didn't pay attention to him and continued to get closer every second. Having surrounded him, they all began to mock and kick him. At this moment, the system congratulated the respected leader on completing the Night of the Hunt mission, and no trace of the wandering monsters was visible, as an even more terrible hunter appeared. A Jack the Ripper surgical knife item with an unusual effect was also obtained, as well as several interrogation kits, strategic weapons, and other interesting abilities. Sometime later, the scoundrel lay in convulsions and could not even move. This effect was too powerful, and the medicine turned out to be extremely effective. He threw the party, hoping half the people would be cops, but this guy may have had nothing to do with it at all. In fact, it was just a joke, and the hero realized that they were all to blame for this. The puppet fell and lay on the floor as if it had lost its life. Suzhou gave her 3 seconds, and if she followed him, he would send her to the medical university for research. The upset puppet immediately stood up, heading for its new owner. After some thought, the guy decided to call her Xiaobai, and he assumes that she wouldn't mind. Now they need to return to the party together, because there are still many killers there. Meanwhile, a fierce fight broke out at the party itself. The criminals tried to escape before Suzhou returned to destroy them. Some intruders continued to fight anyway, not realizing what lay ahead. The undercover police officer fell to the floor during the fight and was attacked. One of the maniacs pulled out his giant dagger to strike his opponent from above. Suddenly, someone exclaimed that they all needed to stop. All the maniacs and murderers immediately looked at the one who said these words. It was Suzhou, and he felt that they seemed to still be afraid of him, and now he just needed to continue to stall for time. while the door to the room suddenly broke. A special squad burst into it, fully equipped and ready to shoot to kill. And so the old acquaintances met again, and the guy wondered why Suzhou was here. As if nothing had happened, the hero said that he was not guilty, and there were many witnesses. All criminals began to be handcuffed and sent to prison. The reporter was rescued. Fortunately, she was absolutely unharmed. Despite the emotional trauma, she had no physical injuries. The girl saw the hero leaving and decided to call him. She screamed for the police to catch Suzhou, that disgusting pervert. Hearing her scream, the guy asked her to calm down, explaining that he did it to save her life. At this time, the police themselves were at a loss and did not know what they should do in this situation. Ultimately, they decided to detain the guy and asked him to come with them. Looking around for support, the guy tried to find Chenmo to ask him for help. Sighing heavily, the old friend realized that he was no longer able to help. Sometime later, events moved to the police station. It was in the interrogation room, as the main character was interrogated. Various people interrogated him, and each of his statements was carefully recorded. He was also asked about his age and profession, and it turned out that he was 24 years old and studying. The researcher announced that Suzhou had been expelled from the school half a month ago, so trying to deceive the police was useless. Surprised, police wanted to know what he was doing in this place in the middle of the night. The hero, pretending that there was nothing special, remained silent, claiming that he was just passing by. This answer did not suit one of the men, and he warned that it was better to tell the truth, since, in his opinion, the police would reveal this lie. Then another question followed. Why did he take all these things with him if he really was just walking by? And the guy again tried to justify himself, saying that he was coming home from work, and his work is connected with a house where there are ghosts. A bottle of sauce and a knife that was not sharpened, and a rope was used to tie a knot around the bottle. Another policeman at that time understood that this guy had not left the crime scene, was familiar with the commander, and was ready to testify, and yet, obviously, everything was not so simple here. This guy was also the victim of 2 murders in a row, and judging by his experience, he is probably credited with being a highly skilled criminal. Unfortunately, Suzhou encountered a cunning policeman who was going to find out the truth from him. At this time, the commander entered the interrogation room, saying that he had interviewed other witnesses, and everyone confirmed that this guy was not a suspect, and moreover, he provided valuable assistance, so he should be released immediately. The police were clearly not prepared for such a turn of events and did not know what to do. Ultimately, the hero was released, and he was glad about it. The old friends left the interrogation room together. Turning around, Chenmo said that if Suzhou considered him a friend, then he should explain why he had been conducting investigations alone lately. Smiling, he just began to deny, claiming that nothing special was being investigated, he was just lucky. The corpse of a killer wearing a coat was found at the crime scene, and this criminal was connected to a family murder case and was shot dead about 5 years ago, and the autopsy results have just arrived confirming that this man is also dead. It was as if nothing had changed. They had returned from the dead, and that was really strange and didn't make sense. In addition, the man arrested today appeared to have signs of damage from a chainsaw, although no chainsaw was found at the crime scene. In any case, despite the hero's desire to continue the investigation, it would be better for him to take a break. This is something over which he cannot maintain control. Chenmo was also ordered to organize a consultation for Suzhou, given that he had become involved in many cases and needed to regain his strength. Stunned, the hero noted that, in his opinion, the criminal needed this consultation more than he. All the same, he will have to be there, and despite his size, this is already inevitable. Suddenly rang out loud scream. Zhao's attention, she shouted his name. The police explained that after the previous incident, she seemed to have lost her mind, and the mention of his name made her go crazy, so it was important for them to figure out why this was happening. While the hero realized that, unfortunately, he never found new clues. Suddenly, the hero has a new mission from the system, and a terrible murder has occurred in the campus inside the abandoned building of the Wuzhou Police Academy, and he needs to find the criminals within 24 hours, and the clue to the dark conspiracy hiding behind the city of Wuzhou will be given. The penalty for failure is so severe that the hero will forever lose what he worked so hard to find. The hero did not like the upcoming punishment at all, and he thought about how to proceed. His boss also received a call and was ordered to go somewhere, to which he exclaimed that a new case had suddenly arisen, and he was not going to send him home. It turned out that something happened at the police academy, from which he was expelled, the guy suggested. He expressed a desire to go with a police officer to investigate this matter. Chenmo agreed, and this time they became partners, which freed the hero from worrying that he might be mistaken for a criminal. Sometime later, they got into the car and headed to the crime scene. Driving through the dark streets, the hero realized that the conspiracy associated with the city of Zhou was truly inexplicable, and it was difficult to imagine how all these events were connected. Meanwhile, the police had already arrived at the crime scene. They began to seal the room so that no one could get in there. Experienced police officers began to inspect the premises to understand what happened here. There were no obvious signs of convulsive contractions on the victim's body. Based on the evidence, they could rule out that the time of death was 12 hours ago. There were puncture marks on the victim's skin, and the conjunctiva was covered in red fluid. Probably she had been tortured before death, but this was not the cause, as another part was badly damaged, possibly by a blunt object. A man who saw the younger guy approached and was surprised, assuming that he was a forensic pathologist. But it turned out that the hero is just a veterinarian doing this amateurishly. The boss immediately asked his subordinate if he had found anything valuable. The victim was likely strangled prior to blunt force trauma, suffered severe head injuries, and then died from respiratory arrest. This was almost exactly consistent with their initial analysis, and the culprit seems to be far from new. They don't even have fingerprints. Su Zhao immediately noticed that they might be looking too superficially and recommended that they take a look around. There were no signs of a physical fight at the crime scene. It appears she was placed there after the crime was committed, and the perpetrator was quick and efficient, killing her with one blow, clearly demonstrating his cold blood. It was currently the semester break, and the victim was the only occupant of the dorm, and the likelihood of her being targeted by a random criminal was extremely low, especially considering this was a police academy. At this time, a thought struck the boss, and he realized what could happen here. After that, he ordered the school to be locked down and the surveillance cameras at the gate retrieved from the morning until the evening of today, and no attention should be paid to the surrounding area of the dormitory. A stranger was present at the crime scene, probably a man who committed a deliberate crime, and thus the search area can be narrowed and evidence can be discovered more quickly. At that moment, it seemed to the hero that this mission was really easy. His friend came over and stated that even he thought the hero might be a suspect and might be trying to figure something out to get out of trouble. Surprised by this statement, the hero smiled and asked his friend to stop. And suddenly he noticed something unusual. The light in one of the nearby windows began to flicker, as if someone was standing outside the window. The friend claimed it was just a joke and should be forgotten. Su Zhao asked not to worry, announcing a sudden pain in his stomach, and left for a while. The hero immediately headed somewhere. Not understanding what was happening, the friend wondered what was happening to this guy again. All this time, someone was watching them from the window. This was the maniac who committed the crime. He thought the police were as stupid as a swarm of useless flies, and that was truly a shame. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the door. Someone asked if there was anyone in this room. The man looked out from behind the door and asked who came. It was Suzhou, who was wondering if Zhang Shun is in this room and can he be found in the dorm. Fearing that he would be deceived, the maniac denied his involvement, claiming that he was not here. It turned out that the guy had his own plans, because Zhang Shun essentially doesn't exist here. The maniac began to report, claiming that he meant that he did not live in this room. However, this was enough for the hero to forcefully open the door. Because the name is Zhang Shun was fictitious and does not actually exist. The maniac began to regret that he had not ignored the hero, but now. A fight broke out and the hero confronted the maniac. The smart guy dodged the maniac's blow and went to the window. At that time, the door to the room closed. The joyful maniac was already anticipating that he would do something terrible in this room. Taking out a bat, he began to laugh, but the main character said that he was unlucky. This confused the maniac, because he did not understand why he was unlucky. All because his phrase was crudely borrowed. But it didn't matter, because he was out of luck, although he seemed to want to know how Suzhou was able to figure him out. As he already said, there are only two of them here, and death awaits the main character. Hearing this, the guy first smiled, and he asked the question whether the maniac wants to find out what true mastery is. Serial killers have a similar mentality, wanting to return to the scene of the crime to enjoy their work of art, and this is why many of them fall into the trap. The maniac clearly didn't like this comparison, because Zhao was sitting right in his room. Because he pays attention to those around him to find someone who is acting strangely, but he did not expect that the villain would be watching from here. Using binoculars and not turning on the light, the impudent man looked at the girls in the toilet, which irritated the hero. At these words, the insolent man was clearly indignant and began to swing the bat, ready to deliver a crushing blow. Suddenly, the main character's phone rang. Without answering the call, the hero told the maniac that Suzhou had already come with the police, and he was not going to tell them about what was happening here, and in exchange he offered to talk peacefully. The enraged maniac ordered the call to be answered, threatening to cut off his head if the hero did not obey. The call turned out to be from Chen Mo, who was wondering where Suzhou was and why he had not returned. In a calm tone, the hero said that he had an attack of diarrhea and was unable to talk. Hiding the phone, they continued the conversation. The scoundrel asked with interest what exactly the guy wanted to know. The first question was about the reason for the man's murder. This question greatly confused the scoundrel. The scoundrel replied that he had no reason since it was useless to him. Suzhou demanded to stop the fiction and tell the real reason, promising help if it was touching. Angry, the maniac hit the wall with the bat. He said that he escaped from a mental hospital by hearing an oracle. The puppet followed the story carefully. The maniac didn't understand why his victim wasn't screaming and decided that this idiot deserved to be punished by the police. He thought that the scoundrel should be handed over to the police so that he could receive a well-deserved punishment. The hero believed that this maniac meant punishment and decided to hand him over to justice. Suzhou felt that he had met someone lucky, which allowed him to stop this idiot. The villain continued to say that the hero still does not realize what a dangerous situation he is in, since death can await him at any moment. Suddenly, a strange red liquid began to drip onto the villain's head. Turning his head towards the ceiling, he noticed an unidentified creature crawling towards him. With rotten teeth, it was eager to catch him in order to inflict maximum damage. He could hardly believe his eyes when he discovered a creature slowly crawling along the walls. It turned out to be the same girl, and he thought that she should have died already. In fact, he himself said that even after his death, the victim would not forgive him. The sinister girl began her attack, aiming to strike with her claws. At that moment, the maniac begged her to stay away and waved a bat, trying to scare her. Now it became clear to him that this was impossible, and probably all this was some kind of illusion. Meanwhile, thunder erupted over the building and lightning flashed. The police rushed around the room where the events were unfolding, and Chenmo thought that his friend should be extremely careful. Knocking on the door, they tried to see what was happening inside and find out if there were really people there. After exchanging glances, the police decided to enter. Having broken through the door in one of the rooms, they went inside. The spectacle turned out to be extremely strange, since they saw something they absolutely did not expect. They were met by Sujao, who appeared to be in perfect order. The police were eager to find out where the suspect or criminal was. Suddenly, the guy pointed his finger downwards, as if the criminal was there. And indeed, it turned out that this scoundrel hid behind the door when it was broken down. All together, they left the building, where a huge crowd of curious people were already waiting for them, wanting to know what had happened. The criminal shouted that there was a ghost there, and the girl turned into a ghost to haunt him. No one except the guy saw this girl, and he begged her to stop pursuing her. Even if the guy was not crazy before, now the hero was sure that he had lost his mind. The friend immediately said that there was no point in explaining anything, since he was already accustomed to such situations. Fortunately, the hero did not rely only on words, and the criminal confessed to his crimes, leaving all the work to the police. Still, the friend was curious how he did it, considering how loud the scoundrel was shouting on the phone. In fact, no one knew, and Sujao simply stated that the victims would never forgive him even after death, after which he began shouting that there was a ghost. The good partner really believed him, but the one who participated in this lost his mind and was also taken in for questioning. All police cars left the scene. The guy was also on his way in one of the police cars when he suddenly received a notification from the system. The manager was congratulated on completing the task, and the fear on campus subsided, and the soul of the deceased seemed to have found momentary peace. The item you receive after completing the quest may be related to the mental hospital that Guy escaped from. His friend nevertheless decided to send him home and asked him to rest a little, since he had been working for a very long time today. As if out of nowhere, a little girl appeared and greeted Sujao. She then started screaming, accusing him of being a scoundrel, and how dare he leave her after the game. Chenmo saw all this and was truly amazed by what was happening. At first, he thought that his superiors were exaggerating when they demanded that they go to counseling, but now he believes that counseling is really necessary. It should be remembered that you should not allow nonsense. The lowest charge is 3 years in prison, and the highest is a death sentence. Although people are free to have any fetishes, he would still recommend seeing a doctor, as he did not expect the hero to be a lolicon. This accusation upset the guy even more, because he did not consider himself a lolicon. At the same time, the girl screamed that she knew his secret, and he should be responsible for it, after which she grabbed his leg and began to bite. Then he decided to take 10 steps back and say that he really did something, but he protected her from obsessive brats, which is why she was saved. The girl continued to manipulate, claiming that he caused the child a lot of psychological harm by abandoning her on the outskirts of the city in the middle of the night. This really amazed the hero, since the girl skillfully manipulated people. But it didn't matter because the party was ruined. Mr. Song was caught without anyone getting hurt, and besides, it seemed like he and the policeman had become very close. And then the girl exclaimed whether he had guessed from the very beginning that she was being cunning. Once again, the hero watched in amazement as the girl came up with new conspiracy theories. There was never an answer, and this trick usually worked every time, but it didn't work on the main character. The guy still didn't have time to play with her, so he asked permission to go home and sleep, because tomorrow they both needed to go to the doctor. The girl said that she knew about the doctor and about the shelter that was hidden. She discovered only a few clues after a lengthy investigation. and Lil Wang wanted to find out if Su Zhao was connected to the fire 12 years ago. 12 years ago, a mad psychiatrist used a torch to take the life of one of the people. Su Zhao at that moment wondered if this was just a coincidence that was too large, and whether the system was carrying it out, or if it was an ominous prediction of future events. Sometime later, events unfolded in the main character's house. Lying on his bed, he wondered what could be hiding within the walls of all the hospitals and whether it was connected with what he was looking for. Suddenly, in another room, someone started singing loudly and asked him to stop. As it turned out, it was a little girl warning him not to go to the toilet. Realizing that this scoundrel could do anything, the girl sighed heavily and continued to wash herself. Suddenly, she noticed that a puppet was sticking out of the window. This surprised her greatly because she did not understand how a guy could have a puppet. She really wanted to know the name of this baby, and Su Zhao just silently got dressed. She saw this puppet at the moment when she thought that the main character was simply stupid. In fact, the hero simply didn't want to hear someone shouting, "FBI, open the door." The little lady, embarrassed, continued to watch the hero and blushed slightly. At that time, the guy was reading a book and was absorbed in the process. Unfortunately, all her clothes got dirty and she put them out to be washed. Suddenly, she had an idea on how to solve this situation. Sometime later, Xiaobai called the guy, and so she appeared to him in his shirt, which belonged to the hero himself. At the same moment, red panties flew at her. This made her very angry, and she called Su Zhao stupid, not understanding why he did this. He did this to ask her to stop embarrassing herself and put on normal clothes. The naughty girl did not listen to him and continued to sit in only her shirt. She drank yogurt, which the main character kindly provided her with. Thus, he only allowed her to stay because she had information on the case and it was time for her to share it. Hearing this request, the girl immediately said that he was extremely unromantic. And she began to tell a story according to which 20 years ago there was a fire in a psychiatric hospital in Wuzhou, as a result of which 44 patients were injured. That crazy psychiatrist was behind it all. It all started with the fact that an unknown person took the life of his 7-year-old daughter on the way home, and the killer was mentally unstable, which, according to the police, was the reason for his insanity. And after the tragedy, he disappeared, and then there was a fire. Listening to this story, the guy could not understand how this relates to the current investigation. The abandoned hospital remained unattended for 8 years, but 4 years ago, the rate of mental illness increased sharply, leading to an increase in crime, which was the reason for the reopening of the asylum. The incident attracted the attention of many. Private detectives, investigators, and adventurers secretly headed to the hospital. As a result, they all disappeared. Except for one journalist named Chai, and several months later, he was referred to a patient who was apparently still alive. The girl hinted that the secrets of the psychiatric hospital were connected with the recent murderer. Su Zhao decided to be away for a few days, instructing the girl to stay safe in the hospital, and he asked her to create a cover story in case she needed help, and told her that she could contact the policeman who brought him. The little lady was outraged by this turn of events and asked him not to say that he was heading there, and she warned him against doing anything stupid and promised to continue the investigation, but she never revealed the secret. Waving his arms, the hero replied that it was really a great idea to go to that hospital. At that time, she was relaxing on the sofa, strictly observing the ban on attacks on his personal belongings. For the girl, this was a serious blow, and she described it as malicious. Sometime later, events unfolded in the early morning hours. At this time, the main character was heading to a psychiatric hospital, taking with him a variety of equipment. As he put things into his backpack, he thought about the necessary equipment. He realized that infiltrating a mental hospital would be an extremely difficult task. One last glance at the sleeping girl, and he began to walk away. A minute later, the door closed behind him, and the hero went to investigate. Immediately after this, Xiaobai woke up and called Suzhou stupid, highlighting her doubts about his ability to infiltrate. The events took place near a psychiatric hospital. Chenmo gave a ride to a friend and decided to find out if he was going to a meeting with a psychologist, and seeing the unusually massive backpack, the caring friend suggested not to get involved in additional problems. To this, the hero replied that he was simply accustomed to wearing such a backpack and nothing more. Pointing his finger at the hero, the caring friend talked about yesterday's girl and urgently asked him to refrain from illegal actions. At this point, the hero was asked to avoid illegal actions. This confused Suzhou because he had no plans to do anything like this. A few minutes later, Chenmo left, leaving the hero alone. Events unfolded in the consultation room. The nurse approached Dr. Dong, talking about the patient brought by the police, and asked if he should be brought. The doctor immediately recognized Suzhou, a survivor of the killing center, and wondered if he was truly lucky. However, this was secondary. It was important to calm the patient, who was probably scared and suffering from a mental disorder. The patient was already standing at the door of the office, and the doctor invited him inside. The brave and decisive guy entered as if he had never experienced a crime. At this time, the doctor could not believe his eyes. Seeing a victim in this guy, nothing in his appearance suggested the need for psychological help. However, the doctor decided to remain calm. Perhaps previous incidents had activated his defense mechanisms and the injury was more severe than he thought. The good-natured doctor received the patient, invited him to sit down and relax, creating an atmosphere of trust. The doctor's name was Wenbing Dong, and he was happy to accept Suzhou as a patient. The hero introduced himself, indicating that he was born in 1991 and suggested calling him Mr. 91. This surprised the doctor, but he did not lose his professionalism. He decided to discuss the patient himself, wondering how he felt in difficult situations, and the doctor reassured him, emphasizing that this was not an interrogation, but a conversation similar to a conversation between friends. With regret, the guy admitted that he had no other choice, since the criminals were holding him hostage. The doctor laughed, supporting his feelings of helplessness in such situations. Then the guy had no choice but to scare them half to death. The doctor assumed that it was a joke and asked not to continue in the same spirit. But in fact, the guy was serious. Now the hero decided to talk about the last case, suggesting that the doctor may have heard about similar operations under the guise of the police, where many agents worked to catch many criminals. It turned out that the hero was the one who scared these criminals half to death. The doctor laughed again because of the cruel jokes, arguing that unarmed citizens are not able to resist criminals. This answer displeased the guy because he was not unarmed at that moment. This behavior alarmed the man, and he laughed awkwardly. This is because the guy actually had a weapon lying in his backpack, not far from him. At that point, the psychologist decided to state that, in his opinion, Mr. Su's mental state was fine, and it would be prudent to conduct another quick check before ending the meeting. The interviewed man, looking at his watch, asked whether his reaction to such a procedure would be normal. At this time, the hero thought that the doctor was probably mistaken, since no one in this world could be hypnotized anymore. But this was insignificant, and Suzhou decided to give him a chance to try. In response, the doctor brought the watch closer, inviting the hero to look at it in his hand and relax. At the same moment, another copy of the guide dealt the doctor a desperate blow to the head with a brick. With a huge bruise on his head, the doctor fell to the floor and did not get up. This happened because the hero did not want to be portrayed as a crazy pervert. And if he lets this continue, what awaits him is not a shelter, but a prison cell. And fortunately, he also has the skills of physical hypnosis. Therefore, ordering the puppet to move away, he immediately took action. The patient calmly took his place in the chair, while the man gradually came to his senses. He couldn't understand what happened and only remembers that he was hypnotizing someone, but for some reason, it was as if he had been hit with a brick. He may have been thinking too much, and the patient appears to be under hypnosis. The kind man sat down in a chair and asked to tell him how the guy felt when he encountered these perverted killers in the past. The hero immediately replied that he felt happy. This answer truly shocked the unsuspecting man, and he even choked on his tea. It turned out that in real life, the hero always behaved like a law-abiding citizen, but when the killer appeared before him, he was finally able to take revenge. After going to the doctor, he asked me to think about it, and in everyday life, there is a lot of stress to go through, so it is important to find an emotional outlet. Chasing killers becomes the best way to relieve stress. In addition, they will not be punished by law for this, and by presenting themselves if necessary, they may even be awarded a badge of honor. Then he offered the man something special. However, he stopped listening and said that at the sound of a clap, the hero would wake up, completely forgetting about what had happened. The calm guy suddenly came to his senses and asked if everything was okay and what had just happened. The surprised doctor assured that everything went well and he was fine. Instantly, the doctor wrote down that Sujao was a potential threat. It doesn't matter since he really can't be considered a safe person at this time. Shortly after this, the man asked the guy to leave the room, announcing that the session was over. Smiling, the hero immediately stood up and expressed gratitude to the doctor. Sighing heavily, the doctor knew they would have to subject him to further close observation. Suddenly, the guy decided to add something else to his communication with Dr. Wenbin Dong. Smiling, he expressed delight at the hypnosis session. These words greatly surprised the man, making him begin to get nervous. Against all odds, he pressed the panic button, calling the orderlies. Someone immediately ran in the corridor, trying to get into the room. It turned out that they were guards who wanted to find out from the doctor what had happened. The frightened man ordered the guards to detain the patient standing right in front of him. Many orderlies and security guards surrounded the hero, and the doctor announced that he had been diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder and represented an extreme danger. The doctors were immediately ordered to examine him and check his things for possible weapons, and also to put the patient in a straitjacket. Sometime later, the hero found himself in a straitjacket and completely paralyzed. Throughout this period, the doctor continued to monitor him, even falling from his chair, after which he ordered him to be sent to a psychiatric hospital. Wenbin Dong continued to show emotion while the orderlies and guards took the hero away. Despite his compassion for the doctor, the guy expressed gratitude to him, considering Wenbin Dong his hero at the moment. The doctor was afraid and begged to be sent home to his mother. The scenes unfolded within the walls of a psychiatric hospital. The orderly threw the newly arrived patient into the cell, instructing him to be quiet. In an instant, the door slammed shut. Finding himself alone in the cell, the hero was thinking about how to proceed. At first, he tried to get rid of the straitjacket so he could move freely. Suddenly, someone nearby began to cough, and the hero inquired if this person was sick, since his cough was persistent, and if he was sick, then he needed to start treatment as soon as possible. However, it turned out that it was not a person, but some kind of creature similar to a tadpole. The guy, looking up, shouted that if he allowed Dr. Han to treat him, he would get a new disease. And even if he was healthy before, Sujao was on the verge of death here, and ward number 0 was not the most favorable place. The unknown being claimed that all the previous inhabitants of this place had died, and one of them hit his head against a wall, another committed suicide by hanging, and another died by biting off his tongue. There are also rumors that ward number 0 is haunted. Zhao felt after this story. Breaking out of the straitjacket, the hero began to strangle the creature, knowing that it was guilty of the deaths of other people. He then took out his chainsaw and exclaimed that he felt great. Having stepped on this pathetic creature, the guy sought revenge so that it could no longer harm anyone. The creature immediately figured out where the guy got the chainsaw from, as if the guards were unable to notice anything. It asked if the hero was afraid that the sound of the chainsaw would attract people here. Smiling, the guy said that he used to think that this creature had a mind, but apparently he was wrong. Raising his sharp scalpel, he threw a lightning strike, asking the entity how it liked being treated in a mental hospital. The unknown creature asked the guy to stop, claiming that they didn't even know each other, and he was just as sick as they were, only a little different. He was absolutely right, even though Suzhou knew him. After all, he saw his photograph when he was studying at the police academy, and in the 2000s, a shocking murder occurred in the city of Wizhou, in which people were hidden in an iron barrel. 3 teenagers and 3 innocent children were poisoned by carbon monoxide and buried in iron barrels using brutal methods before the perpetrator hid the barrels under an overgrown construction site. Continuing to strangle the creature, the hero shouted that this was the person who committed this terrible crime. And he hid in this mental hospital, thinking that he would not be found, and now he would die right now. The stunned scoundrel tried to find out whether the guy was really trying to restore justice for the victims, believing that he was not all right in his head, and doesn't he understand that now he is a completely different person and cannot be killed? Even if he committed a crime, he has already been sent to a mental hospital, and no one can kill him. Delighted, the guy decided to ask if he had ever heard of a house of horrors. The creature, not understanding anything, sought to find out what the stranger meant. At that same second, a huge tunnel opened in front of the scoundrel. The essence itself ended up in some kind of liquid, and it seemed to absorb it. Then he found himself in a barrel, from which he could not get out. The criminal continued to scream for help to be rescued and pulled out of here. He even began to hit the wall, continuing to scream about the urgent need to free him. A moment later, someone decided to open the lid of the barrel to look at the villain. It was Suzhou who promised that the criminal would go through this terrible torture again and again and would only dream of death. The stunned scoundrel begged to be released, asking for forgiveness, and there were people in the shelter much worse than him, and he could lead him to them, and only first he had to be freed. But the criminal should have relaxed because he would see them soon anyway. Again, the guy began to close the lid, and the criminal begged him not to leave him alone, as he was scared in the dark. The lid of the barrel was successfully closed, and the criminal continued to serve his endless sentence. The system gave the hero a new task and proclaimed that the patients of the psychiatric hospital should rejoice, because it was necessary to welcome the emergence of a new king. Dangerous patients from the past and present are within the walls of the Wuzhou City Psychiatric Hospital, and you need to be careful as they just love to cause pain, and you need to find the main culprit and put an end to this never-ending nightmare. Hearing a strange noise, the guard knocked on the door and asked the newcomer what was the matter, and if he did not keep his mouth shut, he would be offered to try electrotherapy. The smart guy immediately stated that it was not he who spoke, but the sound was coming from the next room. The security guard was indignant, saying that there was absolutely no one in the next room. Looking around, he actually discovered that there was no one near him. Taking his scalpel, the guy began to cut something on the wall. After that, he called the guard to come to him. This really scared the man, because he didn't expect anyone else to talk to him. Angered even more, he ran up to find out what he wanted there. Meanwhile, another door in the cell began to open. The stunned guard wanted to understand which villain did not close the door properly, which is why the patient ran away. As if nothing had happened, he is met by a hero who asks his friend to calm down. Although it may seem strange, he can't take it anymore, so he wants to try electrotherapy with their doctor. Immediately after this, several guards began to lead the hero to this very electrotherapy. Together, they shackled him and handed him over to the doctor to perform a new procedure. The guards had already left, and the doctor gradually began to prepare. Before starting the procedure, he decided to share something with his patient. Deciding to find out if Sujao had previously been to the electrotherapy room on his first day in the mental hospital. The director of this institution decided to introduce himself, and he began to call himself Dr. Han, welcomed the new patient, and talked about the mental hospital in the city of Wuzhou. Every year, several people mysteriously disappear, and Dr. Khan hopes that if he behaves well, the guy will receive his electrotherapy. He also expressed hope for the patient's strength to endure the procedure. The other doctor was shocked to see the patient causing trouble on the first day, and it seemed that he was unaware of Sujao's reputation as the King of Lightning. Sujao decided to clarify whether the doctor really considered himself that strong. The doctor asserted his power by describing himself as the most ferocious and claiming that every criminal must bow to him. If the guy doubts, he was asked to look around to see all the doctor's masterpieces. All the works of art created by the doctor were displayed in the room. Suddenly, the hero began to express doubts, noting that it seemed to him that he was the only crazy person in this place. The doctor considered himself a hero who punishes villains, and in this regard, he made no exception for himself. The doctor listened with pleasure as his patient screamed, filling the air with sounds that to him were the most pleasant melody in the world. Taking the microphone, he exclaimed that the night was just beginning. Without reacting to provocations, the guy asked the doctor not to say anything strange, claiming that he was still a virgin. These words startled the doctor as the patient continued to show energy for rude remarks, and deciding to keep the conversation going, the doctor suggested that the patient initially feel a weak current. By pressing the button, the doctor waited for the reaction of the patient who was lying on the bed. He anticipated the moment when the patient would scream, filling the air with deadly sounds. The procedure began, and Sujao was surrounded by many lightning bolts. The number of lightning bolts increased with every second, but the guy remained absolutely unperturbed. The doctor began to have doubts about whether he was performing the procedure correctly. What he saw amazed him, as he could not understand how this was possible. The guy in front of him remained completely indifferent to the current, and the doctor wanted to know how he managed it. Realizing that the electrotherapy machine was not working, Sujao said that he had another plan. In anticipation of the next steps, the guy said that he had come up with something else. He took out his electric chair, which he had so diligently kept. The hero asked the doctor if he knew what esports was. Now, they are starting an electrical therapy tournament. Because of the doctor's scream, the guards reacted, thinking that something strange was happening. At the same time, another guard viewed the situation more calmly, believing that everything was fine. The guards did not know that the doctor was in the electric chair and was experiencing strange sensations. He was soon to fall silent. The hero watched what was happening with interest, although he wanted to know how the doctor assessed his new sensations. The doctor realized the situation he was in and shouted that he could not lose, considering himself the best in this matter. He screamed at the top of his lungs, claiming that Sujao was a worthless worm. Suddenly, he pressed some button. The doctor kept looking at the guy with an angry look and said that he would make him taste high voltage. The insolent man looked at the patient's reaction, expecting his suffering. But he has not yet noticed that exactly the same copy is standing right behind him. The patient believed that it was just a dream and did not understand why he did not react. The scoundrel thought it was just a dream and could not understand why the patient was not responding. Suddenly, someone came up behind him and put his hand on his shoulder. Now Sujao was ready to show what he was capable of. The perplexed doctor began to scream, begging him to wait and let him go, promising to leave, and he claimed that he would get nothing if he was treated so cruelly. The guy agreed to let him live, provided that the doctor revealed the secrets of the mental hospital. The scoundrel in the guise of a doctor was deciding whether he should agree to the terms. The guy just said that time was running out and the doctor needed to make a decision quickly. With these words, he gave a new charge of electricity to help the doctor think better. Watching the doctor, the guy warned him, giving him one last chance. Talking to him in a calm tone, the guy asked how to contact the director of the mental hospital. The criminal, in the guise of a doctor, did not want to disclose information, claiming that this was only possible in his dreams. The hero did not like this answer at all, and he warned that the doctor could not escape punishment. The puppet also followed the events and reacted in fear to what was happening. The criminal continued to scream in pain, insisting that all his torment was just a fantasy. Life was leaving his body every second, and his brain seemed to disappear. The guards were startled by the patient's loud screams. After leaving the office, Sujao noticed that this interrogation did not work as intended. The guards noticed the patient leaving the office and sternly warned him not to move. They then decided to alert other guards about the patient's escape. Stretching and holding out his arms, the hero announced that the electrotherapy was finished and it was time to send him back. The guards looked at each other, not knowing what to do in this situation. The 4 guards grabbed the patient and were amazed that nothing happened to him after the electrotherapy. The hero decided to shout throughout the psychiatric hospital, claiming that the doctor is a kind person and everyone was deceived about electrotherapy. The screaming patient claimed that the doctor was truly a good person and encouraged everyone to believe it. One of the patients was stunned by what he heard and could not believe that electrotherapy could be safe. The patient approached the security guard, saying that he felt uneasy and urgently needed an electrotherapy session. Entering the office, he asked the doctor about the safety of today's electrotherapy. The mental hospital client was glad to have found the doctor and insisted that the procedure be gentle, threatening to complain. Dr. Young was amazed by the patient's courage and realized that his words about the safety of electrotherapy were taken seriously. At first, the man did not understand the meaning of what the doctor said. But soon screams echoed throughout the psychiatric hospital, and the source turned out to be the same patient. Sujao was convinced that he had no choice but to wait at the clinic until the next day to look for more clues. Later, one man told the other that it was just a slight delay related to the newcomer Sujao, and nothing special happened. The mysterious stranger could not understand how nothing special had happened, considering that Dr. Young represented a significant advantage, and yet this young man was almost half to death. Another doctor pleaded guilty to failing to properly investigate the incident. After several similar incidents, he must have his own secrets, and this was really important because he proved that he deserved the right to join their team. The mysterious stranger ordered the doctor to promote Sujao. Sometime later, the hero woke up from strange sounds. He instantly jumped out of bed when he heard someone knocking on his door. When he initially looked at the door, he didn't notice anyone. Looking around his bed, he realized that the mark he had made earlier had disappeared. Apparently, he was no longer in his room. Turning his head, he still couldn't see where exactly he was. The door to the room began to open slowly. A man appeared in the small doorway, his expression full of surprise. After all, there was no patient in the cell, who apparently should have been here. The embarrassed doctor shouted loudly, asking where this patient was. The next moment, the hero himself had long left, remaining unnoticed. Wandering through the unusual corridors, Sujao was completely lost. Coming out onto the balcony, the guy still couldn't realize where exactly he was. The place where he found himself turned out to be completely unreal. Then the man who ran the electrotherapy office came to mind. This was not what Sujao expected when he was told to keep dreaming, and it turned out that he was not just pretending to remain silent. Suzhou guessed that this was just a dream, but it was not known whose dream it was. Approaching an unfamiliar door, he decided to open it. Entering inside, the guy saw several people sitting at a round table. The mysterious strangers greeted him with a smile and watched him in surprise. They all showed friendliness, as if they were trying to get to know him better. With attentive disbelief, the hero continued to watch them, getting closer every second. It turned out that the other man was looking for him and was really amazed that the patient was already here. As soon as the boss arrives, they can immediately begin this meeting. They had plenty of time to interact with the new patient. One of the strangers expressed interest in the newcomer's talents and asked how many crimes he had committed. The strangers continued to watch him, but Suzhou remained calm and showed absolutely no signs of discomfort. Waving his arms, he declared that he was a law-abiding citizen and did not need to commit crimes. Those present in the hall did not understand why the boss was accepting such statements and laughed. The hero immediately noticed that they had not yet finished their acquaintance. After introducing himself, Suzhou revealed his name, causing confusion. However, he was confident that he was superior to them. Since he is scaring killers rather than committing crimes, that is his claim. At this answer, the girl laughed, noting that if anyone could scare someone who had not committed a crime, then it was probably only small, scared kittens. Another man suggested that this might be a mistake, since the man wasn't even suitable as a reference subject. The savvy guy immediately realized that it was Ju Bi. Previously, he was a forensic doctor and enjoyed performing operations so that all the victims were exhausted, and the hero could not even establish the exact number of victims. The woman in turn introduced herself as Wang Xinyi, and she committed terrible acts after catching her husband cheating, and then committed a series of other crimes with married couples. Mr. Collector had 4 crimes on his record, and the old man had 8, and Suzhou had seen their faces in the criminal investigation files. One of the wards apologized for not having time to warn everyone present that this guy had confused Dr. Young in the morning. Experienced criminals could not believe it because the doctor was truly a tough nut to crack. Additionally, the Rainy Night Killer and the Underground Butchers seemed to have ties to him. However, this was unimportant because once they entered this place, they became fearless and it didn't matter who they were. Suzhou immediately wanted to figure this out, although they still didn't tell him who they were, what they were trying to achieve, or what this place was. This was their territory, whether it was a dream or a spiritual realm, and most importantly, as long as he was willing to obey the boss, they would not harm him. The old man suggested that it seems that Suzhou was trying to be careful, but there is no point in leaving, and there are only criminals here, and trying to escape is useless. And why shouldn't he join their team? And it's not that bad. With a wave of his hand, the hero only noted that this sounds absurd because he is now in a dream. The ward emphasized that he should refrain from hasty actions because they are all experienced criminals. However, Suzhou sees only 2 reasons to stay, either get rid of them or another. It is to rid the world of criminals like them. The scoundrel did not want to admit it and took the knife, rising from his place. The hero took out Jack the Ripper's scalpel. A serious fight began between them, and it was clear that the main character would win. With deft movements, he struck the villain, winning. Many blows were struck, and thus the villain was completely disarmed and could no longer continue the fight. Thus, the hero easily dealt with the first criminal who tried to prevent him from restoring justice. Everyone present was amazed at this development of events, unable to understand how this was possible, and amazed where he got the weapon, and perhaps this guy was stronger than everyone else. One of them suggested silence, reminding that there was only one attacker, and if they joined forces, they could defeat him. The villains began to attack again, and the hero stood motionless, preparing for the attack of each of them. With a deft movement, he accurately threw the brick provided by the system. The lady at that time watched everything that was happening and could not understand how this was even possible. Suzhao felt great because he was bringing justice to this room. The weak girl fell to the floor, not wanting to fight such a strong opponent. The guy looked at the old man and asked who would attack him next. Approaching the old man, he looked him straight in the eyes. The scoundrel lost all ability to speak, his eyes rolled back, and he could not utter another word. Dropping his wand, the criminal began to tremble in fear. Then he sat motionless, unable to utter a word. The remaining criminal continued to look at what was happening in amazement, trying to understand how this could happen, that fear caused such a reaction. For the hero, it was completely unimportant, because the remaining criminal was next in line. Total, there left two. The hero emphasized that he is not the devil, and if the criminal answers his questions, he will be released. The unknown guy immediately exclaimed that he would never betray his boss. Turning his gaze to the girl, he asked, "What about her?" The frightened girl assured the handsome man that she had not harmed him and was ready to fulfill all his wishes. The hero rejected such an offer because he is a victim, and this would violate his moral principles. Nevertheless, the guy decided to take a short break since the fight was quite difficult. But the girl's behavior angered him, and he decided to act. Taking out his saw, the guy shouted that he would punish everyone in this room, and the lady immediately recognized the Texas chainsaw, although it seemed impossible, because how could he project a fictional character with such a strong personality? Suzhao began to restore justice using a saw from the system. While using the saw on the girl, he saw that she had disappeared. It turned out that the guy left the last criminal for later because of his behavior, and he wanted to hear the last words of this scoundrel. The stunned criminal was wondering what to do in this situation. Then he began to beg the hero, promising to do whatever he wanted, and was ready to answer all his questions in order to start a new life. In reality, all of these words were lies, and they are all spirits that will disappear as soon as they are killed, and Suzhao did not expect things to go this far. Plus, they are boss creatures, and once they are killed, completely new personalities will appear. This information was extremely valuable, and the guy asked him to clarify this point. The boss was the one who once started a fire in this mental hospital, and they are just individuals created by him. Usually a person can only have one personality, but if someone is able to perfectly copy the thoughts and actions of another person, and yet they can develop on their own, it is almost impossible to control, which leads to the development of schizophrenia. All these personalities constantly fight for control of the body, and the winner becomes the main personality, but other personalities continue to appear in consciousness and show various signs. As for these creatures, Boss created them by modifying the basic personalities of patients in a mental hospital before transplanting physical bodies, and then he extracted their personalities and put them back. Thus, they turned into serial criminals. These words really shocked the hero, and it became clear to him that he was in the very center of events. Threatening the criminal, the guy tried to find out where their boss was hiding. Pointing his finger at the hero, the criminal only said that he was hidden in Suzhao's mind. This entire world represents the internal landscape of the protagonist. Specifically, it is an exact replica of Zhou's city. In this city, there were even residents who freely communicated with each other. They carefully watched the passerby. It was quite strange for the man that ordinary people lived here. An ordinary person can create only a small space in his imaginary world, but this space turned out to be too vast. Not to mention the creatures representing so many passers-by. However, the good thing is that they still answer to their boss, and once he gets rid of him personally, he will turn into the most dangerous serial criminal. Suddenly, the man noticed something interesting. It was an umbrella lying on the floor, and he accidentally stepped on it. This item raised some truly strange questions, and the man decided to bring it up. As it turned out, There were many faces depicted on the umbrella, and they all watched the man without laughing. Suddenly, a stranger asked the gentleman to join him in the car. After getting into the car, the unknown person asked where they were going. The mysterious stranger only replied that they were heading to the club. Sometime later, they were already there. The unknown man began to slowly move towards the club, as if he knew what awaited him there. Opening the door, darkness reigned in the room. But the unknown man moved forward without hesitation, as if he foresaw what awaited him there. The stranger at the same moment only wished him good luck and smiled ominously. Once in the club, the man looked around and noticed that the surroundings were quite amazing. On one of the walls hung a lot of different photographs, somehow connected with each other. Suddenly, someone began to descend the stairs, accompanying their descent with claps. A clown appeared and greeted his distinguished guest. Smiling, the man suggested that this clown could be the main personality of the owner of the body. Perhaps that was the case, but perhaps not. The next moment, the man was already preparing to attack. He had seen many talented individuals before, each of which was strong and had its own unique traits. But all who challenge him have one thing in common. This property is this. All his rivals turned out to be just ghosts. The cunning clone deftly avoided the blow that the man had prepared for him. And soon he disappeared, as if he had evaporated from the place where he had previously stood. The opponent turned out to be much faster and successfully dodged the lightning attack. Looking at each other, they realized that this competition would be really difficult. Events continued to develop in the fantasy world. The guy exclaimed, saying that Suzhou promised to let him go. The hero immediately asked the criminal to delve into his memory and clarified whether it was true what he had said. The scoundrel only replied that even if his personality was destroyed, he would still remain in his head, living only in this world, like all of them. These words seriously influenced the guy, and he wanted to know how true they were. It was true. He would become a puppet, but unlimited power was promised, and sooner or later, the world would submit to him. Listening to this, the hero still didn't understand what the scoundrel's gain was. It turns out that this involves letting the criminal know who their boss is. Suddenly, another creature appeared who wanted to understand what was happening here. The scoundrel is stunned to learn that Suzhou is also present. The guy assumed that this scoundrel was part of their team since he was here. It turned out that the creature has a second body, and it will forgive the hero since he is generous. Suzhou, hearing this, was delighted to learn that this body was the second. He instantly dealt a devastating blow to finish off the insolent person who was pretending to be a tough monster. While events were unfolding in an imaginary world, the clown was fighting with a mysterious man. Despite the difficulties, the clown continued to resist. The man was extremely strong, had been preparing for the fight for a long time, and was going to win. Carefully watching his opponent, he became stronger every second. In just a moment, a series of blows followed, intertwined with hand movements. The opponent managed to dodge despite the incredible speed of the attacks. Having disappeared, the man continued to watch, waiting for the right moment to attack. But noticing something strange, he decided to hide, feeling a catch. The rose that fell from the balcony caught fire and was getting closer every second. Raising his hands to protect his head, the man assumed a defensive pose. The rose that fell from the balcony suddenly exploded, creating a giant explosion in the room. Luckily, the man managed to defend himself by crossing his arms and continued to use them as a shield. As the smoke from the explosion cleared, visibility was gradually restored. The enemy was not detected in the field of view, as if he had disappeared. The stunned man continued his search, ready to continue the fight. However, the enemy was already behind him, pointing a gun at the man's head. Several shots rang out, but the man took out his blade and began to deflect the bullets. He fell to the floor, continuing to perform various strikes and dodging shots. Using a noose, he still managed to grab the clown, who deftly dodged. Grabbing it, the man dragged it towards him, preparing to deliver a parting blow. Looking at this trap, the clown made several conclusions. Standing in the shadows, he admitted his mistake about the man. Meanwhile, the smart man was approaching, saying that this clown was not worthy to stand next to him. He must be obeyed, and he will allow the clown to be himself, and together they can take over this world. These words only made the clown laugh. And suddenly, he pulled out a pistol, aiming straight at the villain's head. Unafraid, the man thought that they were trying to deceive him because there were no longer any cartridges in the pistol. However, this was not the case, and the gun fired. This is because the clown already said that there is no need to react so seriously. Therefore, he decided to call an assistant to finally end this fight. The frightened man immediately turned around, sensing that there was someone behind him. This turned out to be true, since the opponent was standing right behind him, holding a huge cleaver in his hands. Seeing him, the man realized that with every second, the opponent was becoming more and more dangerous, since he had a second personality, equally dangerous as the first. In response to this, the clown laughed, because no one told him that he was the main person.